The God Emperor of mankind has never known fear, until today. Across 10,000 years of endless warfare, the Master of mankind has witnessed horrors beyond mortal comprehension. He has seen the birth of thirsting gods in the screaming depths of the Imperium. He has watched civilizations older than Terra crumble to dust beneath the weight of entropy. But the rift tearing open above Holy Terra defies even his understanding. This is not chaos. This is not Xenos. The golden light pouring through the dimensional breach carries signatures that predate the universe itself. And with it comes a force that operates by rules the 41st millennium has never encountered. The Astronomican flickers. Across 1,000,000 worlds, astropaths scream as something wrong brushes against their consciousness. Not the burning corruption of chaos, but something clean, organized, utterly alien to the warp's twisted logic. Their minds cannot process what they sense, and thousands die in that first moment of contact, blood weeping from eyes and ears as their brains simply shut down. On Holy Terra, Custodian Guard Captain General Trajan Valoris receives emergency reports from 17 different defensive stations simultaneously. A tear in reality has manifested directly above the Imperial Palace. The Sisters of Silence advance in silent ranks, their null presence creating dead zones that should strip any psyker of power. They report something impossible. No warp presence whatsoever. The breach expands like a wound in the fabric of existence. Through it descends a figure in crimson and gold armor, a circular shield bearing a star insignia raised against the impossible light. His movements are precise, controlled, tactical. Behind him emerges a massive green humanoid radiating fury that registers on every sensor in the palace district. Then, a red and blue suited figure moving with inhuman agility. A golden-haired woman crackling with cosmic energy that tastes nothing like the warp. Others follow, each one wrong in ways that make tech priests clutch their mechadendrites and whisper prayers to the Omnissiah. They move with the coordinated precision of a strike force. Their aesthetic screams wrongness to every sensor and psyker within range. These are warriors, clearly, but warriors from somewhere else entirely. Deep within the Imperial Palace, past 17 layers of psychic shielding and adamantium barriers that could withstand sustained Titan bombardment, the Emperor perceives them. His shattered consciousness, spread across the golden throne like fragments of a broken mirror, focuses with terrible intensity. For the first time in millennia, genuine uncertainty enters his calculations. These beings do not register in the warp. They have no souls, or rather, their souls operate on frequencies the Imperium cannot touch. They exist outside the cosmic machinery that has governed this galaxy since before humanity crawled from Terra's primordial oceans. They are outside context problems in humanoid form, and leading them, descending last through the breach in armor of impossible blue, comes a Titan, 30 feet tall, eyes blazing with crimson light, a star emblazoned on its chest surrounded by golden wings. The armor is ceramite-like, but wrong. The skull iconography mockingly mirrors the Imperium's own symbols. It is a grotesque fusion of everything familiar and everything alien. Astartes' power armor scaled to god size, but built by hands that never knew the Mechanicum's prayers. The Mechanicum adepts watching through remote sensors experience something they have not felt in centuries: technological confusion. Their databases contain no reference for these alloys. Their spirits cannot commune with these machine components. The armor simply does not speak their language. The Avengers have arrived in the 41st millennium, And something has sent them here wearing the skin of the Imperium's own symbols. Something that knows this universe intimately. Something that looked at the master of mankind's creations and thought a single, devastating thought. I can improve this. Somewhere beyond the veil of reality, in a place that exists between universes, something watches the unfolding chaos with satisfaction. The pieces are in position. The game is beginning. And in the depths of his failing consciousness, the Emperor of mankind perceives a truth that chills even his ancient soul. Whatever sent these outsiders here is laughing. The Custodian Guard mobilizes with an efficiency that borders on precognition. Within 30 seconds of the breach's appearance, 3,000 golden warriors have formed layered defensive cordons around the Eternity Gate. Their movements are silent, perfect, a river of gilded armor and crimson plumes flowing into unbreakable formations. Macro cannons, each the size of a hab block, swivel to track the descending figures. Across the palace grounds, the war horns of Titan legions sound, a mournful bellow that promises annihilation as their reactors begin to glow with incandescent power. The Sisters of Silence advance in silent ranks, their null presence creating dead zones in the psychic atmosphere, voids that should strip any psyker of their power and leave them screaming in the sudden emptiness. Captain America lands first. His boots touch the marble of the Sanctum Imperialis courtyard, and immediately he feels the wrongness of this place. The air is heavy, thick with the cloying taste of incense, old blood, and ozone. The architecture screams of worship taken to a pathological extreme. Statues of a skeletal figure upon a throne loom everywhere, their eyeless sockets seeming to follow his every move. And the pressure, a psychic weight born from the desperate prayers of quadrillions of souls, presses against his consciousness, a silent roar of unending fear and suffering. "This isn't Earth," he says into the team's private comm system, his voice a pillar of calm in the swirling impossibility. "Stay alert. Non-hostile posture until we understand." A custodian's guardian spear screams toward his throat. Steve's shield snaps up, instinct faster than thought. The weapon, a masterpiece of imperial artifice wielded by a demigod, strikes the vibranium disc. The resulting shockwave is not a sound, but a physical violation of the air itself. It cracks the marble courtyard for 50 meters in every direction, throwing lesser servitors from their feet. The custodian, Tribune Vikellen, has fought for 3,000 years. He has personally slain greater demons and orc war bosses that could tear battle tanks apart. He has never encountered a being who could match his strength while wearing what appears to be primitive, brightly colored armor. His second strike comes faster, a blur of gold and crackling energy. And again, the shield absorbs it, the strange metal doing something impossible with the kinetic force, rendering it inert. Spider-Man's spider sense explodes in a symphony of panic. "Cap! They're all attacking! Every one of them!" Thor raises Mjolnir. "Hold!" Lightning. True lightning, not the foul-smelling warp fire of this reality, arcs across the courtyard. But it does not strike to kill. It creates a barrier, a dome of crackling, clean energy that forces the charging custodians back, their auramite armor sizzling where it makes contact. Thor hovers above his teammates, cape billowing, and his voice carries with the weight of godhood. "We are not your enemies. We seek only to understand how we came to this place." The custodians do not comprehend the alien tongue, but the translation servitors embedded in the courtyard's architecture do. The words echo in flawless high Gothic a moment later, their metallic tone failing to capture the Asgardians' authority. The attack pauses. Not from fear, custodians know no fear, but from tactical reassessment. The Golden Giants regard these intruders with a new, cold wariness. The lightning wielder radiates power that registers on their auspex scanners as comparable to a minor warp entity, yet it feels clean. The green behemoth's gamma signature is climbing steadily, suggesting an upper limit that their systems cannot calculate. And the Titan in blue has not yet moved. It stands motionless, observing, its crimson eyes tracking every spear, every cannon, every warrior. Weapon systems that should not exist hum within its frame. Technologies that blend familiar Terran engineering with something else entirely. Something blasphemous in its elegance. The Mechanicum adepts watching through remote sensors experience something they have not felt in centuries. Technological confusion. Tribune Vicellin speaks through his helm's vox, his voice a synthesized growl. "What are you?" Captain America steps forward, deliberately lowering his shield. A gesture of peace in any culture he had ever known. "We're the Avengers, and we're looking for a way home." Deep within the Imperial Palace, past 17 layers of psychic shielding and adamantium barriers that could withstand sustained Titan bombardment, the Emperor of Mankind sits upon the golden throne. His body is a withered husk, a skeletal effigy sustained only by the agonizing daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers. His consciousness, shattered 10,000 years ago, exists in fragments scattered across past, present, and a billion possible futures. But now, for the first time in millennia, he focuses. The effort is monumental, like a dead galaxy reigniting its stars. The beings in his courtyard defy every category his vast intellect has ever conceived. The Emperor has seen much. The birth of the chaos gods in the churning sea of souls, the dizzying heights of human civilization, the abyssal depths of its fall. He has walked among aliens of crystalline thought and demons of pure emotion, and entities that existed before matter coalesced. These Avengers are none of those things. They are human, or human-adjacent. Their genetic structures register as baseline Terran. No Astartes modification, no abhuman mutation, no Xenos contamination. Yet their capabilities exceed what baseline humanity should achieve by orders of magnitude. The Green One, his cellular regeneration operates on principles that violate known biology, a constant, furious act of creation. The lightning wielder channels energy that resembles warpcraft but tastes entirely different, older, drawn from a universe with different physical constants, a reality without the taint of the immaterium. And their souls, they do not register, not in the way a soul should. It is not the soulless void of a machine, nor the anti-soul of a null. It is as if they vibrate on a frequency the warp cannot touch, rendering them invisible to its hunger. And the construct in blue. The Emperor's psychic attention fixes upon it, and for a fleeting moment, something like recognition flickers through his fragmented mind. The armor's design is clearly imperial. Adeptus Astartes iconography, ceramite derivative plating. Even the Aquila-adjacent star symbol on its chest. But it was built wrong. Built by hands, guided by an intimate knowledge of the Imperium, but not bound by its dogma or its faith. Built by something that looked at his own holy creations and thought, with breathtaking arrogance, "I can improve this." The Emperor reaches out with his mind, a psychic probe of unimaginable power, intending to peel back the layers of the pilot within the blue armor. He finds nothing, not a psychic null. The Sisters of Silence create a suffocating absence. This is different. The consciousness within that armor exists in a state the warp cannot perceive. It thinks in patterns that have no emotional resonance for demons to feed upon. It is, in the truest sense, alien to the underlying metaphysics of this reality. Fascinating, the Emperor thinks, in a voice that has not formed coherent words for centuries. He issues a command, a psychic impulse that travels through the conduits connecting him to his custodians. Tribune Vikellen receives it as an irresistible compulsion, a thought that is not his own, yet carries the absolute authority of his creator. Do not destroy them. Bring them to me. Vikellen hesitates, an unprecedented, unthinkable act for a custodian. The Emperor's orders are absolute, but these intruders have appeared in the heart of the Sanctum Imperialis, the most sacred ground in existence. Every protocol, every iota of his 3,000-year duty, demands their immediate and total annihilation. Bring them to me. The psychic weight of the second command buckles reality. The air around Vikellen shimmers. His hesitation evaporates, crushed by a will that holds the galaxy together. He raises his guardian spear not in attack, but in a signal that ripples through the golden ranks. The Master of Mankind will receive you, he announces in High Gothic, the translation servitors converting his words into the Avengers' own tongue. Follow. Touch nothing. Speak to no one. Any deviation will result in your immediate termination. Captain America exchanges a quick glance with his team. Tony Stark's voice crackles through their private comms from within the blue armor, a tremor of disbelief in his tone. Did that skeleton on the throne just invite us in for tea? I don't think we have a choice, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, murmurs, her eyes scanning the thousands of weapons now tracking them but not firing. We fight our way out. We're starting a war with an entire planet. Steve nods slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant, impossibly vast Eternity Gate. We go. We talk. We figure out what brought us here and how to get back. The Avengers move forward, escorted by beings who have never needed to escort anyone anywhere except to an execution chamber, walking deeper into the heart of a nightmare empire. The walk to the Golden Throne takes 3 hours. The Imperial Palace is not a building. It is a continent-spanning megastructure of cathedrals, fortresses, and monuments to 10,000 years of human suffering. The Avengers pass through halls where the walls are decorated with the gilded skulls of martyrs, their empty sockets seeming to follow their progress. They cross bridges, spanning chasms thousands of feet deep, filled with the moaning, cybernetically lobotomized forms of penitent servitors, endlessly performing pointless tasks. They witness processions of pilgrims crawling on bloody knees toward shrines they will never reach, their faces masks of ecstatic agony. Bruce Banner's psychological training keeps the Hulk contained, but barely. The suffering here is industrial. This is not cruelty for cruelty's sake. This is a civilization that has made anguish into a sacrament, a necessary fuel for its own survival. What kind of people build something like this? Clint Barton whispers, his archer's eyes cataloging kill zones and defensive positions out of pure habit. Desperate ones, Steve answers quietly, his voice low. Look at their eyes. They're not cruel. They're terrified. Of something so bad that this, he gestures at the skull-lined walls, seems like protection. They reach the Sanctum Imperialis proper, and the scale shifts from awesome to horrifying. The Golden Throne dominates a chamber the size of a city. Its mechanisms stretch into darkness above and below, a titanic fusion of technology and something else, something organic and bleeding. Cables thick as redwood trees connect to a figure that might once have been human. The Emperor sits, if sitting is the word, his skeleton barely covered by papyrus-thin skin. His eyes empty sockets that nonetheless see everything, and the pressure. Thor staggers. For the first time since gaining Mjolnir, he feels small. The presence emanating from that throne is not psychic in any way Asgard comprehends, but it carries weight. The accumulated faith of quadrillions of souls, compressed into a single point of impossible density. It is divinity by brute force, godhood sustained through suffering. Tony Stark's armor locks up. Every diagnostic system screams warnings. The entity before him registers as a power source that dwarfs the arc reactor by factors his computers cannot calculate. Friday, analysis. Unable to comply, boss. The energy signatures are, I don't have a framework. He's broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, alone seems able to meet the Emperor's eyeless gaze. Her binary form flickers at the edges of her being. Cosmic power, recognizing cosmic power. He's dying, she says softly, her voice barely a breath. Whatever he is, he's been dying for a very long time, and something's keeping him here. You perceive correctly. The voice does not come through air. It manifests directly in their minds. Not telepathy as any of them understand it, but something rawer, a thought impressed upon reality itself. I am the Emperor of mankind. I have held this throne for 10,000 years, shielding humanity from horrors your universe has never known. And you. The attention focuses, a psychic lance aimed at the blue armor, on Tony Stark within. You wear my symbols without right. You bear my iconography without understanding. Explain this violation before I unmake your atoms. Tony's faceplate retracts, revealing a human face twisted in a mix of confusion and defiance. I didn't design this armor. When we were pulled through that portal, it was waiting for us. It called to me. Put itself on me before I could stop it. The Emperor's attention sharpens to a razor point, the psychic pressure intensifying. Then something sent you here. Something with knowledge of my Imperium. And that something. A pause hangs in the air, thick with unspoken power. The throne groans, and the psychic pressure spikes, making the very stone of the chamber vibrate. Plus is laughing. In the Imperium, where emotion becomes geography and thought has mass, 4 entities older than stars turn their collective attention toward a single point of festering reality. Holy Terra. Tzeentch perceives the Avengers first, the changer of ways, whose million eyes watch every thread of fate as they weave the tapestry of existence, sees a tear in his own work. And what he sees disturbs him. These beings have no threads. They exist outside his grand scheme, unaccounted for variables in calculations that span eternities. Their presence is a blind spot in his omniscience, a patch of absolute blackness where there should be shimmering possibility. Tzeentch has not experienced a blind spot since the war in heaven, and the sensation is an infuriating, terrifying novelty. They are not of the pattern, he muses, his crystal labyrinth reshaping itself around this new, impossible information. They come from a universe where I do not exist, where none of us exist. Nurgle laughs, a wet gurgling sound like continents of flesh sloughing into oceans of decay. His interest is simpler, more patient. All things rot, brother. Even these outsiders will learn despair. Their flesh is just meat, their hope just a delusion waiting to fester. Grandfather Nurgle is content to wait for their inevitable end. Khorne does not speak. Khorne does not need to. The blood god watches. His perception is not of schemes or futures, but of raw, violent potential. The green one, the creature called Hulk, registers on his senses as a vessel of such magnificent, pure rage that even the blood god feels a tremor of anticipation. Here is a being that could rampage across battlefields for eternity, generating skulls for the throne with every thunderous footstep. Khorne has not felt such a profound hunger for a new champion since he first laid eyes on Angron. And Slaanesh? Slaanesh trembles with a sensation that is both fear and exquisite ecstasy. "They are perfect," she whispers across the warp, the thought caressing the minds of her demons like a razor's edge. Uncorrupted, untouched by our influence, pure in a way nothing in this galaxy has been pure for 60 million years. I want them. I want them. The thought of introducing them to sensation, of breaking their flawless forms and souls, is a pleasure so profound it threatens to overwhelm her. But beneath their individual obsessions, all four gods share a singular, chilling concern: the armor. The construct of blue ceramite and impossible technology does not register in the warp at all. It is a hole in their perception, a mobile null zone that walks through their domain like a knife through still water. Whoever, or whatever, built that armor understood the Chaos Gods at a fundamental, intimate level. It was designed specifically to be invisible to them, to be anathema to their very nature. And that means somewhere, out there in the multiverse, something knows about the ruinous powers, something that is not afraid. We must act. Khorne's thoughtless rage coalesces into something approaching strategy, a rarity that speaks to the gravity of the threat. These outsiders will empower the Corpse Emperor. They must be turned or destroyed. The gods rarely agree. Cooperation contradicts their fundamental natures. But the Avengers represent a threat that transcends their great game, an anomaly that could end it entirely. For the first time since the Horus Heresy, the Chaos Gods begin to coordinate. In the Eye of Terror, demonic legions receive new orders, whispered through dreams and madness. Warp storms begin shifting, their currents carving new direct routes toward Terra that have not existed for millennia. Demon princes, who have not stirred from their thrones of torment since the great betrayal, feel a cold, irresistible compulsion settling into their corrupted souls. And in the Imperium, aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler, Warmaster of Chaos, Destroyer of Cadia, leader of 13 Black Crusades, receives a vision. He sees the Avengers standing before the Golden Throne. He sees the armor of blue and gold, mocking imperial iconography with its clean lines and functional grace. He sees the God Emperor of mankind, his hated enemy, the corpse god whose shadow has tormented him for 10,000 years, actually communicating with these outsiders. "Kill them," four voices whisper in perfect, terrible harmony inside his mind. "Kill them all, and we will give you Terra." Abaddon smiles with teeth that are no longer entirely human. Finally, after all these years, the gods are united, and their target is clear. Within the throne room, the Emperor's psychic probe tears through conventional reality to examine the blue armor more closely. Tony Stark screams, not from pain, but from the sensation of being known at a molecular level, his every atom catalogued, his every memory unspooled, his entire existence laid bare, and assessed by a mind that dwarfed galaxies. "You are not from your universe," the Emperor's voice thundered through their minds. "Nor are you from mine. This armor was constructed in a third place, a realm between realities. Someone has been watching both our civilizations." The revelation crashed through the Avengers' assumptions. Captain America stepped forward. His shield raised not in defense, but as a gesture demanding attention. Who? Who's been watching? I cannot see them. They exist in a space my perception cannot reach. But I can read the armor's purpose in its construction. The Emperor's attention turned inward, analyzing data streams that existed only in psychic space, peeling back layers of the construct that even its wearer did not know existed. It was built to fight. Not humans, not Xenos. It was built to fight the powers that corrupt my Imperium, the entities of the warp. Every system, every alloy, every circuit has been designed to maximize damage against demonic entities while remaining invisible to their perception. Tony's HUD flickered as the armor responded to the Emperor's analysis, locked subroutines suddenly opening. Specifications he hadn't accessed scrolled past his vision. Void shields tuned to warp frequency disruption. Weapon systems designed around purified promethium and sanctified silver analogs. A power source that burned so cleanly it produced no emotional residue for the warp to detect. Someone wanted us to fight demons, Tony breathed, the words catching in his throat. They sent us here, gave me this armor, and pointed us at something called chaos? Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir crackling with a storm's unease. In my realm, we have prophecies of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. What you describe sounds like a war between realities. Why would anyone want us involved? The Emperor's response carried something that might have been bitter amusement. Because I am dying. Have been dying for 10,000 years. My Imperium crumbles. The forces of chaos grow stronger with each passing century, and whoever sent you here believes you might tip the balance. Bruce Banner spoke for the first time since entering the throne room, his voice carefully controlled, a scientist analyzing an unwanted variable. You're saying someone is using us as weapons, deploying us into your war without our consent. I am saying that someone has placed pieces on a board you did not know existed. Whether you choose to play their game or find your own path, that decision remains yours. Natasha's eyes narrowed, her gaze sweeping from the skeletal figure to the golden giants guarding him. And what do you want? You invited us here instead of having your guards kill us. You need something. The Emperor's presence contracted, focusing with terrible intensity. The chaos gods are moving. I can feel their attention converging on Terra for the first time since the Heresy. Your arrival has triggered a response that will bring war to my doorstep within days. So yes, Romanoff of the Red Room. Natasha flinched, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of her posture. He knew her name, her history, everything. I need something. I need warriors who can fight the immaterial while remaining uncorrupted by it. I need beings who do not feed the warp with their emotions. I need you. Steve looked at his team. Carol's fists glowed with stellar fire. Thor's jaw was set with grim determination. Tony's armor hummed with unfamiliar power. Bruce's eyes flickered with green light. They were weapons, yes, but they were also people. His people. We don't fight other people's wars, Steve said slowly, his voice steady and clear in the vast chamber. But we protect people. Always. He met the Emperor's eyeless gaze, one soldier to another across an impossible gulf of time and pain. Show us what you're protecting them from. The Emperor does not speak again. Instead, he shows. Visions cascade through the Avengers' minds. Not gentle images, but raw psychic data compressed into experiential form. 10,000 years of warfare, distilled into seconds that feel like centuries. They see the Great Crusade, humanity united under the Emperor's banner, a tide of gold and steel spreading across the stars. They feel the hope, the righteous purpose. They see the Primarchs, 20 demigods crafted from his own genetic material, leading legions of space marines to conquer the galaxy in his name. The Avengers recognize the ambition, the scope, the terrible, breathtaking beauty of it all. Then they see the betrayal. They feel the psychic wound as Horus, favorite son, turns to darkness. They witness brother turn on brother, legions that had conquered worlds now butchering each other in wars that burned entire star systems to ash. They stand on the bridge of the vengeful spirit as the Emperor faces his most beloved son in a battle that shatters them both. Horus destroyed utterly, the Emperor broken beyond repair, a screaming, dying mind interred upon the throne to prevent humanity's extinction. And then the long war begins. 10 millennia of slow, grinding collapse. The Imperium, designed for glorious expansion, forced into a desperate siege mentality. Xenos races pressing from all sides. The warp, hungry and patient, corrupting everything it touches. 1,000,000 worlds lost, reclaimed, lost again. Generations born, living and dying in wars that have no end and no purpose beyond mere survival. Bruce Banner falls to his knees, a choked gasp escaping his lips, as the Hulk thrashes against his mental barriers, roaring in silent fury. The suffering he's witnessing dwarfs anything Earth has ever experienced. It is industrial, systematic. Billions die every year just to maintain the status quo. Children are drafted into armies before they can walk. Entire planets are subjected to exterminatus, complete annihilation, simply because corruption might exist. "This is wrong," he gasps, clutching his head. "All of it. This isn't protection, it's survival." The Emperor's thought cuts through the torrent. The alternative is not death. It is extinction. The chaos gods do not merely kill. They consume. Every human soul that falls to them feeds their power. Every planet claimed by chaos becomes a breeding ground for horrors your universe has no name for. Captain America sees it clearly, the impossible, brutal math of it. A single demon incursion can corrupt millions. A single heretic left alive can doom a world. The Imperium's cruelty is not madness. It is triage on a scale that defies morality. There are no good options, only degrees of catastrophe. "My God," Carol whispers, her cosmic glow flickering. She has fought celestial entities. She has witnessed the destruction of planets. But this is suffering engineered into the fundamental structure of reality itself. Thor alone remains standing, his expression unreadable. He has lived for thousands of years. He has seen civilizations rise and fall. But even Asgard, in all its glory, never faced an enemy that was omnipresent, that grew stronger from every death, every fear, every moment of despair. "Your gods are not gods," he says slowly, his voice heavy with revelation. "They are parasites, feeding on belief. They are both. That is what makes them dangerous." The visions fade. The Avengers find themselves kneeling or staggering on cold stone, trembling with psychic aftershock. Tony's armor is broadcasting emergency warnings across every frequency. His biometrics show all of them in states of extreme physiological stress. But when Steve Rogers rises, his eyes are clear. The horror is there, but beneath it is a soldier's understanding. "You've been fighting this alone for 10,000 years, he says, his voice quiet but firm, holding the line while everything burns around you. I understand now. He takes a step forward and extends his hand toward the golden throne, an offering of alliance. We'll help you. Not because someone sent us here, because no one should have to face this alone. The Emperor's immense psychic presence flickers, and, for a fraction of a second, the Avengers feel something like genuine, profound surprise from the master of mankind. You are not what I expected. We get that a lot, Tony manages, his voice strained but steady as he straightens up inside his armor. Now, where do you need us first? Robauta Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and Lord Commander of the Imperium, has ruled in his father's name for nearly 200 years since his resurrection. He has brokered impossible alliances, won wars that should have been unwinnable, and held together a civilization that perpetually yearns to collapse. In all that time, he has never been summoned to the throne room without warning. The Primarch enters, his power armor making no sound on the ancient stone. He finds his father's immeasurable attention focused on a collection of beings who should not exist. They are human, yet they radiate power comparable to lesser Astartes, and one, a construct in blue armor, defies his tactical implant's ability to analyze it. His hands rest on the hilt of his sword, the Emperor's own blade, as he assesses the impossible tableau. "Father," he says, his voice a calm baritone that could command armies, "I was not informed of guests. They are not guests. They are variables." The Emperor's thought voice is not the cold, pragmatic command Guilliman has grown used to. It carries something else, something closer to curiosity. "Robut, meet the Avengers. They come from a universe beyond the warp, sent here by unknown forces to participate in a war they do not understand." Guilliman's superhuman mind processes this instantly. "The Chaos Gods have noticed them," he states. "It isn't a question. They are mobilizing. This will be the largest incursion since the Heresy. 4 gods, coordinated, moving on Terra itself." The Primarch's jaw tightens. The skin around his eyes crinkles with the strain of a burden no mortal could comprehend. He has spent centuries preparing for another Black Crusade, another siege, but a coordinated assault from all 4 powers at once. How long do we have? Days, perhaps hours. The warp is turbulent. Prediction is difficult. Captain America steps forward, recognizing the dynamics of command. He is a small man compared to the demigod before him, but he stands as an equal. "I'm Steve Rogers. We're not familiar with your enemies or your tactics, but we're fast learners. Tell us what we're facing." Guilliman regards the baseline human. Rogers stands perhaps 2 meters tall, tiny compared to Guilliman's 3. He wears primitive armor, carries a circular shield, and radiates no psychic presence whatsoever. By every metric of this universe, he should be utterly insignificant. But the Primarch has learned not to judge by appearances. His father clearly sees value here. "The Chaos Gods are entities born of emotion," Guilliman explains, his voice taking on the quality of a lecturer at a war college. "Khorne feeds on rage and violence, Nurgle on despair and decay, Tzeentch on ambition and deceit, Slaanesh on excess and sensation. Every battlefield strengthens them. Every death feeds their power. You cannot defeat them through conventional warfare. You can only contain them, push back their influence, and prevent their champions from achieving critical mass." "Champions?" Thor asks, his hand resting on Mjolnir. "Demon Primarchs," Guilliman says, and for the first time, a flicker of profound pain crosses his features. My brothers, twisted by chaos into monsters. Each commands legions of traitor marines and demonic hosts. If all four gods are mobilizing, they will deploy their strongest pieces. Bruce Banner's voice is carefully controlled, a scientist asking for data. How strong are we talking? Guilliman meets his gaze without flinching. Magnus the Red can reshape reality with a thought. Mortarian's very presence spreads plagues that can rot a world to its core. Angron exists as pure rage made flesh, a creature that has never known a moment of peace. And Fulgrim. He pauses, the grief on his face becoming a mask of iron. Fulgrim was once the most beautiful of us. Now he is something that breaks minds simply by being witnessed. The Avengers exchange glances. They have fought Thanos. They have faced Ultron, Dormammu, celestial beings of terrible power. But these descriptions suggest enemies on a different scale entirely. Enemies woven into the fabric of reality itself. And you've been fighting them for 10,000 years, Natasha says quietly, the statement hanging in the air like a death sentence. And I will fight them for 10,000 more if necessary, Guilliman responds, his voice absolute. But I will welcome whatever advantage your arrival provides. He turns his gaze back to the Golden Throne. Father, where do you want them deployed? The strategic chamber beneath the Imperial Palace would dwarf most stadiums on the Avengers' Earth. It was a cavern of cold stone and humming machinery, dominated by a hololithic display that projected the galaxy in shimmering, three-dimensional light. Thousands upon thousands of red markers pulsed across its expanse, each one an active war zone, a planetary siege, a system on fire. Guilliman gestured, and the display zoomed with impossible speed toward a jagged wound in reality, a place where the stars themselves seemed to bleed. The Eye of Terror. The Chaos fleets will emerge here, he indicated a cluster of systems rimward of Terra. Standard doctrine suggests they'll strike at the Cadian sector first. It has always been the bulwark against Black Crusades. But Cadia fell, Tribune Vishelin interjected, his golden armor reflecting the bloody light of the hololith. Abaddon broke it during the 13th Crusade. Precisely, Guilliman agreed, his tone grim. Which means they'll bypass the ruins entirely and strike directly at Terra. Our father has made the same assessment. The display shifted, showing Terra and the surrounding Sol system, Mars, Luna, Jupiter's orbital platforms, a web of defensive installations that had been accumulating for 10 millennia, the most fortified location in human history. We have the firepower to repel a conventional assault indefinitely. But if the Chaos Gods themselves manifest avatars, if they send multiple demon primarchs simultaneously, Guilliman shook his head. The psychic pressure alone could destabilize our defenses. Tony Stark, his armor's system silently interfacing with the Imperial tech, examined the displays with an engineer's eye. Your defensive grid has redundancies. That's good. But these choke points... He highlighted several orbital corridors with a gesture, his armor projecting its own light onto the hololith, are vulnerable to coordinated strikes. You're relying too heavily on fixed installations. Guilliman's eyes narrowed. You understand void warfare? I understand strategic positioning. The principles are universal. Tony's armor projected modified defensive configurations onto the display. If you shift these platforms here and here, you create interlocking fields of fire that can respond to breaches anywhere in the system, forcing them into kill boxes they can't predict. For a long moment, Guilliman simply stared. The attending tech priests made sounds like grinding gears and static-laced prayers. Then, slowly, the Primarch nodded. "Implement his modifications," he ordered. "You have unexpected insight, Stark. I've had practice defending things people said couldn't be defended." Carol Danvers studied the display from a different perspective. What about offensive options? If we know they're coming, why wait for them to arrive? "Because striking into the eye of terror is suicide," Guilliman stated flatly. "The warp there is so thick that ships lose cohesion. Reality itself becomes unreliable. Even Astartes' strike cruisers have vanished without a trace." "I can survive in space," Carol said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I can survive in a lot of things." Guilliman regarded her with new interest. "You're suggesting a preemptive strike? Against Chaos forces in their own territory?" "I'm suggesting we don't let them pick the battlefield. Where I come from, we call that basic tactics." Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir resting on his shoulder. "I have walked in realms between realms. The warp you describe, it sounds like the spaces between the branches of Yggdrasil. Dangerous, yes, but not impassable." "And I've navigated the quantum realm," Banner added, his voice calm and measured. "Subatomic spaces where physics gets creative. If your warp operates on emotional rather than physical principles, I can develop countermeasures." Guilliman looked at these strange allies, beings from a universe where hope had not been systematically crushed, where heroes still existed in the classical sense. Their confidence bordered on naivety, but their capabilities. "Very well," he said finally. "We will develop both defensive and offensive operations. But understand this. The Chaos Gods have had 10,000 years to prepare for any strategy we might devise. They know us. They know our weaknesses." "Good thing they don't know us," Steve Rogers said quietly. "That's our advantage. We're outside their calculations." Guilliman met his gaze. "Let's hope that's enough." The attack came with no warning. Not really. 18 hours after the Avengers' arrival, the astropathic choirs across the Sol system began to scream. It was not a metaphorical sound, but a literal one, a chorus of agony that echoed in the minds of every psyker within 1 billion kilometers. Their psychically sensitive minds were flooded with visions of blood and impossible geometries, of corruption so absolute it shattered their sanity. 36 died in the first minute, their heads rupturing from the sheer internal pressure. On Mars, the vast fabrication forges of the Adeptus Mechanicus registered impossible energy signatures. Something was probing the Noctis Labyrinthus, the maze of canyons where the most dangerous technologies of old night were sealed away. The machine god's priests mobilized war maniples with frantic haste, but they were too slow. Whatever was testing their defenses wasn't there to invade. It was a feint, a grand distraction. Terra's orbital platforms detected warp translation signatures, ships entering real space from the Imperium. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. "Emergence confirmed," a servitor droned across command frequencies, its voice devoid of the panic gripping the human officers. "Enemy fleet composition. Approximately 4,300 vessels. Designating as Chaos Armada Alpha. Additional signatures detecting in sectors. Compiling. Emergence points confirmed in 17 locations simultaneously." Guilliman received the reports with a warrior's unnatural calm. "As predicted, they're attempting to overwhelm us through sheer numbers. All defense platforms to maximum alert. Void shields to full power. Signal the fleet." "Lord Commander." An officer's voice cut through, thin with static and terror. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. Patch it through. The hololithic display flickered, and a face appeared. Ancient, cruel, impossibly handsome despite the corruption threading through his features like dark veins. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, regarded Guilliman with eyes that had seen the Emperor's fall and dreamed of completing that work for 10,000 years. "Robot," Abaddon said, his voice a silken, condescending rumble that carried across the void. "How long has it been? A century? 2? Not long enough, traitor. I bring you a gift, little brother. The united forces of the Pantheon come at last to claim what should have been ours 10,000 years ago." Abaddon's smile widened. "But that's not why I'm calling. I want to speak with your guests." Guilliman's expression didn't change, but his grip tightened on his sword. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games. The gods see all. Your father brought outsiders into his throne room. Beings from beyond the warp, wrapped in armor that reeks of calculated blasphemy." Abaddon's eyes seemed to pierce the display, searching. "I want to offer them a choice." Steve Rogers stepped into view. His shield was raised, his stance calm and resolute. "We're listening." Abaddon's attention focused with predatory intensity. "You are the leader. Good. Here is my offer. Withdraw. Return to whatever reality spawned you. This war is not yours. The Imperium's sins are not yours to cleanse. Leave now, and the gods will permit your departure." "Stay." His smile became something terrible. "And you will learn what happens to those who interfere in divine matters." "We've met gods before," Steve replied evenly. "We weren't impressed. Your gods are children playing in a sandbox. The ruinous powers are the emotions of a trillion souls given eternal form. They cannot be defeated. They can only be fed. Then we'll put them on a diet." For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Abaddon's features. Then he laughed, a sound without warmth or humanity, cold and sharp as broken glass. "I'm going to enjoy breaking you, Captain. When you beg for death, remember, I offered you a way out." The transmission ended. Guilliman turned to the Avengers, his expression grim. "They know about you. They'll be preparing countermeasures specifically for your capabilities." "Good," Tony said from within his armor, weapon systems charging with an audible hum. "Let them prepare. Friday, how long until we're in weapons range?" "Approximately 6 hours, boss. I recommend we use the time to run some very aggressive simulations." "Then let's get to work." Bruce Banner stood at the edge of the palace's highest observation platform, a sheer drop of kilometers into the smog-choked underlevels of Holy Terra. In the void above, he could see the distant, silent flashes as Chaos Fleet elements tested the system's outer defenses. Behind him, the other Avengers were deep in tactical planning, with Guilliman's staff, their voices a low murmur from the strategic chamber. But Bruce needed air. He needed distance. Because the Hulk was excited. Ever since they had arrived in this universe, the other guy had been pushing against the mental barriers Banner had spent years constructing. It wasn't the familiar boiling rage which Bruce could manage. This was something worse, a deep, resonant anticipation. The Hulk had sensed something here, some fundamental kinship with the very fabric of this reality, and he wanted out. He wanted to play. A low growl echoed in the back of Banner's skull, a pressure that was both physical and psychic. "Blood," the Hulk rumbled from his mental cage. "So much blood. Let me taste it." "Not yet," Bruce muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the adamantium railing. "Not until we understand what we're dealing with." The Hulk's presence surged, a wave of green hunger. They worship rage here. They have a god of anger. I could teach him what anger really means. Bruce's blood ran cold. A god of anger. Khorne. The chaos entity that feeds on violence, that grows stronger from every death on every battlefield. He'd connected the variables, and the equation was horrifying. If the Hulk rampaged in this universe, every kill would feed the enemy. Every shattered body, every act of destruction, would be a prayer to the very thing they were fighting. "Hey, Doc!" Natasha's voice came from behind him. She approached carefully, her steps silent on the grated floor, recognizing the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were hunched as if against a physical weight. "You okay?" "No," Bruce admitted, the word a ragged exhalation. He turned to face her, his expression haunted. "I'm really not." He gestured out at the distant, silent war. "The Hulk is connected to rage, pure, unfiltered anger. And there's a god here that literally eats rage for breakfast. If I let him out, if he fights these demons." Natasha's face remained impassive, but her eyes understood instantly. "You'd be feeding the thing you're fighting against." "It's worse than that," Bruce said, pacing now. "Khorne doesn't just eat anger, he amplifies it. The more the Hulk fights, the angrier he gets. The angrier he gets, the stronger Khorne becomes. The stronger Khorne becomes, the more violence spreads across the galaxy. It's a feedback loop, a perpetual motion machine of slaughter. I could become the most dangerous weapon in their arsenal." Natasha was quiet for a long moment, processing the terrible logic. "Have you told Steve?" "Not yet. I'm still trying to figure out if there's a solution." "And if there isn't?" Bruce looked back at the distant battle, at the pinpricks of light that represented thousands of deaths per second. "Then I stay out of the fighting entirely. Let you handle it without me." "That's not going to work, Bruce. You saw the numbers they're bringing. We need the Hulk's firepower." "You need firepower that doesn't strengthen the enemy," he shot back, his voice tight with frustration. Natasha stepped closer, her voice dropping, becoming conspiratorial. "What if we could change the equation? What if the Hulk's rage could be redirected? Channeled toward something that doesn't strengthen Khorne?" "Like what?" Bruce asked, skeptical. "The Emperor called those gods parasites. They feed on emotion, but they're also made of emotion. What happens if you feed a parasite something it can't digest? Poison?" Bruce's scientific mind caught the thread, a flicker of professional curiosity cutting through his fear. "You're suggesting weaponized incompatibility? If the Hulk's anger isn't quite the same frequency as this universe's rage." "You said it yourself. We're from outside their calculations. Maybe that applies to our emotions too. Maybe your anger is like a signal on a different band. Close enough for them to hear the static, but not clear enough for them to use." It was a theory. Untested, potentially catastrophic if wrong. But it was more than Bruce had 5 minutes ago. It was a hypothesis. It was a chance. "I'd need to run experiments," he said, the scientist taking over. "Observe how the warp reacts to our emotional signatures. See if there's actually a difference. If I can quantify it, I might be able to exploit it." "Then let's find you a laboratory," Natasha said, her tone decisive. "Preferably one with very thick walls." As they turned to leave the precipice, Bruce paused. The Hulk had gone quiet in his mind, not sleeping, but listening, thinking. And for the first time since arriving in this nightmare universe, that silence felt less like a threat and more like potential. A final, deep rumble echoed through his consciousness. "Maybe we can break a god." In a chapel dedicated to the Emperor's divine protection, a space so vast it could have contained a town square, Thor Odinson stood before a massive aquila. The two-headed eagle, symbol of the Imperium, was rendered in flawless gold, its wingspan stretching 20 meters across a wall of polished obsidian. Thousands upon thousands of candles burned in tiered alcoves, their collective light reflecting off gilded walls covered in scripture and prayer, parchments tacked on by desperate hands. The god of thunder had been silent for hours, motionless, a statue of living gold amidst the dead gold of the shrine. "You've been staring at that eagle for a long time," Steve said, his voice quiet as he entered the chamber. The air was thick with the smells of old wax, ozone, and something else, the scent of pure, undiluted belief. "Something bothering you?" "Everything," Thor admitted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the flickering light. He gestured at the surrounding devotion, at the endless rows of burning candles. "And nothing." He turned, his gaze distant. "I have been worshipped, Stephen. For millennia, humans on your world and others offered prayers to me, to my father, to Asgard. I told myself it was tradition, culture, a part of their lives. I never truly understood what it meant to them." "And now?" Steve asked, moving to stand beside his friend. "Now I see what faith looks like when it becomes the only thing keeping people alive." Thor's voice was heavy, weighted with a dawning, terrible comprehension. "The Emperor is no god, not as I understand godhood. He is a man, impossibly powerful, but still fundamentally human. Yet quadrillions worship him. They die with his name on their lips. Their belief sustains him as surely as that golden machine." Steve watched the troubled expression on his friend's face. "You're wondering if Asgard was the same, if the prayers humans offered you were out of love or desperation. I'm wondering if there's a difference." Thor turned to face Steve fully, his blue eyes filled with a storm that had nothing to do with lightning. "In my universe, gods exist because they are. We were born, we grew, we achieved power through our own nature. But here gods exist because mortals need them to. The chaos. Gods were created by emotion. The Emperor has become divine through accumulated faith. Godhood is manufactured. Does that make it less real?" Steve asked softly. "That's what troubles me." Thor gripped Mjolnir, his knuckles white. "If belief creates divinity, then what am I? What is any god?" He looked past Steve, toward the distant unseen heart of the palace where the Emperor sat. "When I stood before the golden throne, I felt something I have not felt since facing Thanos with Stormbreaker in hand. I felt small. Not because he is stronger, I do not know if he is, but because his existence is heavier. He carries the weight of every prayer ever offered to him, every sacrifice made in his name, every death endured for his Imperium." Steve considered this carefully. "On Earth, our Earth, I met a man who said something that stuck with me. He said power isn't about what you can do. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for others." "The Emperor has sacrificed everything." Thor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "His body, his freedom, 10,000 years of agony, just to keep a candle lit in the darkness. I have never sacrificed like that. I have fought, I have bled, but I have always walked away, always survived to fight another day." "That's not weakness, Thor. That's living." "Is it?" Thor looked back at the golden aquila, its twin heads staring into different, equally dark futures. "When we defeat this enemy, if we defeat them, What then? We return to our universe, where our battles are clean and our victories mean something. The Emperor stays here, dying forever, holding the line against horrors that will never stop coming. He doesn't get to walk away. Steve was quiet for a long moment, the silence punctuated only by the crackle of 1,000 candles. Then, maybe that's why we're here, not just to fight their battles, but to show them another way, to prove that sacrifice doesn't have to be eternal. That hope can exist without suffering. Thor met his friend's gaze, searching for any hint of doubt. You truly believe that? I have to, Steve said, his voice imbued with the simple, unshakable certainty that was his greatest strength. Because the alternative is accepting that the universe is designed for misery. And I refuse to accept that. Here or anywhere. Slowly, Thor nodded. The crushing weight didn't lift from his shoulders, but something shifted in his posture, a straightening of the spine, a renewal of purpose. Then let us show these people what hope looks like. Captain Marvel streaked through the void at near-light speed, her binary form a blazing comet of gold against the absolute darkness of space. Behind her, the defensive grid of Terra had shrunk to a delicate constellation of lights, a fragile web holding back the night. Ahead, the Chaos Fleet waited like a cancer spreading across the stars, a festering wound in reality. Carol, you're approaching weapons range. Tony's voice crackled through the quantum communicator he had jury-rigged into their network. Any closer, and they'll start shooting. That's the point, she replied, her voice steady despite the impossible vista before her. I need to see what they've got. This isn't reconnaissance, it's suicide by curiosity. Turn around. I've survived suns, Tony. I can handle a few demon ships. She pushed forward, ignoring his protest. The Chaos vessels were unlike anything from her universe. They were gothic monstrosities of fused metal and screaming souls, their hulls decorated with blasphemous iconography that pulsed with a malevolent, eldritch energy. Some were clearly ships, vast cathedrals of war bristling with cannon. Others were harder to categorize. Living things, or things that were once living, repurposed into instruments of galactic war, their forms twisting and writhing in the vacuum. A sensor sweep fed her impossible readings. The larger vessels registered as both solid matter and pure warp energy simultaneously. Their power sources didn't follow thermodynamic laws. Several ships appeared to exist in two places at once, their positions flickering according to no pattern she could identify. Then the flagship noticed her. It was a mountain of screaming metal, kilometers long, covered in spines and gun emplacements, and the crucified forms of what might once have been humans. Its name pulsed across every frequency, a psychic broadcast of pure hatred. Vengeful spirit. Horus's personal vessel. Now Abaddon's throne of command. A lance battery activated. Carol dodged, barely. The beam of raw chaos didn't travel in a straight line. It curved, hunting her, pulled by something that read her intent. It was a weapon, that thought. More batteries opened fire. Carol became pure motion, pushing her binary form to limits she rarely tested. The beams tracked her, predicting her movements with impossible accuracy. These weapons weren't just targeting her body. They were targeting her future position, anticipating where she was going to be. But Carol Danvers didn't become one of the most powerful beings in her universe by being predictable. She stopped. Just stopped, dead in the vacuum of space. The beams, calculated for her continued motion, screamed past her position by kilometers. In the fraction of a second before they could readjust, Carol channeled every erg of energy she had accumulated and pushed. A wave of pure cosmic force smashed into the vengeful spirit's forward batteries. Shields designed to withstand planetary bombardment flared with sickening colors and cracked. The guns went silent, temporarily, but long enough for Carol to gather critical data. "Tony, are you getting this?" she transmitted, already beginning her retreat. "Getting it. Analyzing it. Holy shit." "Yeah." Carol pushed toward Terra, the enemy fleet still scrambling to retarget her. "Their weapons are psyker-guided. They shoot where you're going to be, not where you are. But they can't handle genuine unpredictability. If we can stay outside their modeling parameters, we can fight them. Danvers, you beautiful genius. You just found their weakness. One of them. There's more." She glanced back at the monstrous fleet. "Their ships are partially alive. That means they can be hurt in ways metal can't. Pain. Fear. If we can make them afraid, then they become less effective. Psychological warfare against starships. Against demon ships," Carol corrected. "We're going to need Thor for this. And probably the Hulk. Banner's still working on the rage problem. Then he better work faster, because based on what I just saw, they're launching their main assault in less than 12 hours. She didn't mention the other thing she noticed, the cold, ancient awareness that had touched her mind when she approached the vengeful spirit. Something that remembered what hope felt like, and had spent 10,000 years learning to hate it. Abaddon knew she was coming, and he was looking forward to it. In the humming, incense-choked depths of Tony Stark's temporary laboratory, surrounded by tech priests who regarded him as something between a miracle and a heresy, the blue armor began to reveal its secrets. The adepts watched, their augmented eyes whirring as they observed a master at work, a heretic of unparalleled genius. "Friday, run that analysis again," Tony commanded, his voice tight with frustration. "Boss, I've run it 17 times. The results are consistent, and consistently impossible. Then explain to me again why this armor contains materials that shouldn't exist in your universe or mine." The data scrolled across Tony's HUD, a cascade of information that defied every known law of physics. Spectroscopic analysis, quantum resonance patterns, molecular structures that were stable despite violating fundamental principles. The armor's core wasn't arc reactor technology. It wasn't this universe's blasphemous warp tech either. It was something else entirely. "The crystalline matrix in your chest plate appears to be what I can only describe as solidified possibility," Friday reported, her voice laced with digital uncertainty. "It exists in multiple quantum states simultaneously, drawing energy from the conceptual difference between what is and what could be." "That's not a power source. That's a philosophy textbook," Tony muttered. He pulled up the armor's design schematics, comparing them to both his own Iron Man standards and the Imperial Knight patterns the tech priests had reluctantly provided. The fusion was elegant, almost seamless. His engineering intuition merged with the Imperium's brutalist aesthetic, then optimized by a third party that understood both intimately. "Whoever built this knew my work," Tony breathed, his fingers tracing the lines of a repulsor housing that was unmistakably his design, yet scaled up and integrated with technologies he'd never even conceived of. "They studied me. They learned how I think." "There's more," Friday interrupted. "I've found hidden partitions in the armor's core systems, encrypted data I couldn't access until we entered the throne room." "What triggered the access?" "Your proximity to the Emperor. His psychic presence seems to have served as an authentication key." The files unlocked. Tony's mind, a supercomputer in its own right, raced to process the sudden flood of information. They were instructions, a manual for defeating the Chaos Gods, not through warfare, but through disconnection. The ruinous powers existed because mortal emotions fed them. Cut off that food supply, and they would weaken. Weaken them enough, and they would become vulnerable. The armor contained specifications for a device, a reality anchor that could theoretically seal a portion of space away from the warp entirely. No psychic connection in or out. Within that bubble, the Chaos Gods would have no power. Their demons would dissolve into nothingness. Their corruption would fail. "This is a weapon," Tony whispered, the scale of it dawning on him. "A weapon designed specifically to kill gods." "The energy requirements are astronomical," Friday noted coolly. "To power a device of this magnitude, we'd need a source on the scale of the Emperor himself," Tony finished, the words tasting like ash. He sat back, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. Someone had built him an anti-chaos suit and handed him the blueprints for killing the most powerful entities in this universe. But the cost would be drawing on the Emperor's own power, draining the life from the one thing holding this broken civilization together. A trade. The Chaos Gods for the Emperor. 4 entities of cosmic evil destroyed. But the price was the Imperium's dying light. "We can't use this," Tony said slowly, decisively. "Not the way it's designed." "Perhaps not as designed," Friday agreed, "but the principles are sound. If we could find an alternative power source—" Tony's mind ignited, racing through possibilities. Carol's cosmic energy, Thor's divine lightning, the pure output of his own arc reactor technology, the Hulk's infinite gamma radiation. Separately, none of them would suffice. But together— Friday, start modeling. I want to know if we can build this device without killing the Emperor. That would require rewriting several fundamental assumptions about energy conversion and inter-universal resonance, boss. Then start rewriting. Tony's voice hardened with a familiar, defiant purpose. We're not trading one life for victory. Not here. Not anywhere. In his private chambers, far from the frantic energy of the war councils and the cold light of the hololithic displays, Roboute Guilliman did something he had not done in nearly 200 years since his resurrection. He allowed himself to doubt. The armor of the Lord Commander of the Imperium was set aside, and, for a moment, he was simply a being of flesh and blood, contemplating the impossible. The Avengers should not have inspired doubt. Their arrival was a tactical gift, an unexpected variable in a war that had become tragically predictable. Their capabilities were astonishing, their resolve admirable. By every metric of strategic analysis, they represented a significant, perhaps decisive, advantage. And yet, that was the very source of his unease. Guilliman had read his father's private writings, the archives hidden deep within the palace that contained knowledge forbidden to all but his most trusted servants. In those ancient texts, the master of mankind spoke of a concept he feared more than any Xenos fleet or demonic incursion: the trap of hope. Despair weakens, the Emperor had written, but false hope destroys. The man who accepts darkness can fight within it. The man who believes in a distant light sees only the candle and does not notice the shadows growing behind him. For 10,000 years, that had been the Imperium's guiding principle. The Long War was not about victory. It was about continuity, about buying another day, another year, another millennium for humanity to exist. Victory was a myth, a forgotten luxury from a golden age that had ended in fire and betrayal. The Avengers did not understand this. They spoke of defeating the Chaos Gods as if it were a reasonable objective rather than a cosmic impossibility. They planned offensive operations into the Eye of Terror, as if such things could succeed without cataclysmic, soul-shattering loss. They believed they could win. But what if they were right? The thought was heresy. Guilliman knew it. He had spent 2 centuries suppressing such thoughts, burying them beneath the crushing weight of duty and the endless, thankless work of empire. Hope had corrupted his brother Horus. Hope had damned 9 of his kin and plunged the galaxy into an eternity of suffering. Yet he could not dismiss what he had witnessed. Captain Rogers, a baseline human, had fought a custodian to a standstill through sheer skill and determination. Thor channeled lightning that felt clean, untouched by the warp's filth. The armor Stark wore contained technologies that even Belisarius Cawl had never dreamed of, and Carol Danvers had survived a direct assault on Abaddon's flagship and returned with tactical data worth more than entire Crusade armies. They were not products of this universe's endless agony. They were forged elsewhere, in conflicts that had endings. They knew what victory tasted like, a soft chime at his chamber door. Guilliman composed his features, reassembling the stern mask of the Lord Commander. "Enter!" Captain Rogers stepped through. He moved like a warrior, Guilliman noted. Efficient, aware, dangerous. But there was something else in his bearing, something the Primarch had seen in his own reflection, long ago, before the heresy broke his family and his faith. "Couldn't sleep either?" Rogers asked, his voice quiet. "Sleep is a luxury I rarely indulge." "Same." Rogers crossed to the chamber's vast viewing window, gazing at the distant, silent flashes of the ongoing Void War. "Can I ask you something? Something personal?" "You may ask. Do you think we can actually win this? Not just survive? Win?" Guilliman was silent for a long moment, the honest question cutting through layers of protocol and pragmatism. Then, surprising himself, he answered with a truth he had not spoken aloud in centuries. "I don't know. I have not allowed myself to consider victory as a realistic outcome in longer than I care to remember." Rogers nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the distant battle. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The only sure defeat is the one you accept before the fight begins." "And where I come from," Guilliman countered, the old dogma rising out of habit, "we have another. Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment." "Maybe we're both right," Rogers said quietly. "Or maybe we both need to learn from the other." He left the Primarch standing there, alone with his thoughts. For the first time in 200 years, Guilliman allowed himself to consider a third terrifying possibility. Maybe hope was not the trap. Maybe it was the weapon they had been missing all along. The Chaos Fleet struck at the 3rd hour of the Terran day cycle. It did not translate from the warp in an orderly fashion. It vomited itself into real space. 4,000 vessels tore through the fabric of the void, their emergence ripping wounds in reality that bled screaming, half-formed souls. The defensive grid of the Sol system, a web of steel and faith spun over 10 millennia, responded instantly. Macro cannons the size of city blocks roared, their shells crossing the void in silent, brutal arcs. Lance batteries painted the darkness with spears of incandescent fury. Nova cannons detonated with the violence of newborn stars, their shockwaves erasing entire squadrons of lesser chaos ships. The void filled with light, a silent, beautiful apocalypse. The Avengers took their positions. Thor stood at the apex of the orbital platform designated Sword Alpha, Mjolnir raised to the heavens. Lightning, clean and pure, arced from his form, creating a vast web of destructive energy that intercepted incoming waves of demonic torpedoes before they could reach their targets. Each bolt was precisely guided. Thor's millennia of combat experience translating to perfect, lethal efficiency. Below, Captain Marvel led the fighter response, blazing through swarms of chaos interceptors like a sun cutting through a diseased fog. Her binary form rendered her effectively invulnerable to their corrupted weaponry. The demon craft learned quickly that engaging her directly led only to instantaneous, fiery destruction. She became a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, her mere presence causing enemy pilots to break formation and flee in terror. On the surface of Luna, Steve Rogers coordinated defensive units alongside Guilliman's command staff. His tactical instincts translated perfectly across universes. The principles of warfare remained constant. When Chaos boarding pods began to penetrate the defensive screens, slamming into the gray dust, Steve was already positioning forces to meet them. "South Quadrant breach!" a tactical officer shouted, his voice tight with strain. "Multiple incursions in the Tycho Manufactorum." "Barton, you're up," Steve spoke into his comm, his tone calm and steady. "Already there, Cap." Hawkeye's voice carried the focus of a man who had made peace with impossible odds. "These things aren't expecting arrows. Let's see how they handle the surprise." Clint Barton had faced aliens, robots, and gods. The screaming horrors pouring from the boarding pods were different. They existed wrong, their forms flickering between states of being, their very presence causing reality to twist and warp. But they still had weak points, and Clint's aim was still perfect. His first arrow took a horror of Tzeentch through what might have been its skull. The explosive tip detonated, and the demon dispersed into screaming, kaleidoscopic light. His second and third arrows followed before the first had finished fading. "Heads up," Tony Stark's voice cut through the comms. "I'm detecting major power signatures incoming. This first wave is just the appetizer." The void tore open again, and something massive emerged. It was not a ship. It was not a demon in any conventional sense. It was a piece of the warp itself given form, a greater demon of Tzeentch, the Lord of Change, known as Mkachen, the unending question. Its form was contradiction made manifest. Part bird, part flame, part crystalline geometry, shifting between states with each passing moment. "Outsiders!" Its voice resonated not through the air, but across dimensions, directly into their minds. "You taste different. The great schemer wishes to know your flavor." Thor rocketed toward it, Mjolnir blazing. "Taste this abomination." The hammer struck. The demon laughed, a sound like shattering glass and whispering lies. Reality bent around the impact, redirecting Thor's divine force into impossible, useless angles. The god of thunder found himself spinning through dimensions he had no names for, fighting simply to maintain his own coherence against the psychic chaos. "Amusing, but insufficient," Mkachen mocked. "Your rage has no subtlety. Your hope has no foundation. You are—" A beam of pure blue-white energy hit Mkachen mid-speech. Unlike Thor's raw power, this attack was calculated. Tony's armor, its null field generators running at maximum, had created a bubble of anti-psychic force around the repulsor beam. The demon screamed. It was not a sound of anger or mockery, but of genuine, agonizing pain, as portions of its impossible form simply stopped existing where the beam touched. "What? How? This should not—" "Here's the thing about questions," Tony said, his voice cold as he locked weapons on the writhing entity. "Sometimes the answer is, shut up." The battle for Terra had begun. While the battle raged across the heavens, Bruce Banner sat in a sealed laboratory deep within the palace, surrounded by humming measurement equipment and a circle of very nervous tech priests. The Hulk churned within him, a caged beast responding to every distant explosion, every psychic scream that echoed from the void. The creature wanted out. It had wanted out since the moment they arrived, but this was different. It wasn't just the violence, it was the taste of this universe, the psychic flavor of industrialized suffering that drove the Hulk into a state of agitated loathing. But Bruce had discovered something. "The readings confirm it," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the wavering lines of holographic displays. "Our emotional signatures are different. Not different enough to matter in normal circumstances, but against entities that literally feed on psychic resonance? Different how?" Natasha's voice came through the reinforced glass of the observation window. "It's about frequency," Bruce explained, pointing to a jagged, chaotic line on one display. "In this universe, human emotions have a direct connection to something they call the warp, a dimension of pure psychic energy. Anger here isn't just a neurochemical reaction. It has a metaphysical component, a specific resonance that a being like Korn can tap into like a power source." He then indicated a second, cleaner line. "But our emotions, we're broadcasting on the wrong channel. It's close enough for them to register, but not close enough for them to properly digest." "So, the Hulk's rage won't feed Korn?" Natasha asked, her eyes narrowing. "Not efficiently, no. There's a mismatch, a harmonic dissonance. It's like trying to power a European appliance with American voltage. It might spark and sputter, but you're not getting a clean flow of energy. There's interference, static, loss." Natasha processed this. "That's good news, then." "It's complicated news." Bruce stood, moving closer to the observation window, his reflection a pale, haunted mask. "The Hulk won't feed Korn at full strength. But that mismatch, it creates another possibility. If I can tune our emotional output, calibrate it with absolute precision, I might be able to generate a kind of anti-feeding. A wave of psychic static that doesn't just fail to nourish the warp, it actively disrupts their connection to it. You're talking about weaponizing the fact that we don't belong here." "Exactly. But here's the problem." Bruce's laugh was a dry, bitter rasp. "To do it, I'd need to let the Hulk out, fully. Let him rage at his absolute maximum capacity, while I, somehow, maintain precise psychological calibration on the output. That's like trying to drive a Formula One car through a minefield while simultaneously solving differential equations in my head. Can you do it? The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Bruce had spent years learning to control the Hulk, first suppressing him, then working with him, finally achieving a sort of strained equilibrium. What Natasha was asking would throw all of that away. It was a demand for maximum rage, precisely directed, with the fate of this universe hanging on whether Bruce could maintain focus while the Hulk tore reality apart at the seams. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The Hulk and I, we've come a long way. But this would push both of us past anything we've ever attempted before. Let me try, a voice rumbled from the deepest part of his consciousness. It wasn't the usual mindless snarl. It was clear. Let me hurt the thing that feeds on hurt. Bruce closed his eyes. The creature that had been his curse, his burden, his unwanted partner, now it wanted to be a weapon against cosmic evil. It wasn't just a desire for destruction, it was a desire for purpose. The Hulk had never wanted purpose before. He'd always been pure id, reactive and uncontrollable. But this universe had shown him something new, a target truly worthy of his infinite rage. Gods who grew fat on suffering, beings who had industrialized misery itself. The Hulk hated them. Not mindlessly, but purposefully. And that purpose might be exactly what they needed. "Natasha," Bruce said slowly, opening his eyes. "Tell Steve I need to speak with him. And the Emperor's people. What I'm proposing, it could save this universe." "Or?" she prompted, sensing the unspoken half of his statement. Bruce's eyes flashed green, just for a moment, a promise of the storm to come. "Or it could make everything so much worse." Aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler watched the battle unfold with a growing predatory interest. His fleet was losing. Not catastrophically. The Chaos Armada still outnumbered Terra's defenders by a considerable margin, but the outsiders were proving more disruptive than his most pessimistic calculations had allowed. The Lightning Wielder had shattered the spines of 3 capital ships single-handedly. The Woman of Cosmic Fire had broken 4 separate assault waves, her presence a burning sun that Chaos gunners could not properly track. The armor of blue and gold was somehow invisible to his demonic advisors, a null space that appeared and disappeared at will, delivering precise, devastating strikes. And the Archer, the mere mortal with his pointed sticks. He had killed 17 demons in the past hour, each shot impossibly precise, each explosive tip calibrated to a specific demonic vulnerability. Abaddon could feel Khorne's divine irritation at these losses, not because they mattered strategically, but because they simply shouldn't be happening at all. "War Master," a word-bearer apostle approached, his voice dripping with the false humility of his legion. "The gods grow impatient." "The gods can wait," Abaddon said without turning from the viewing port. "I have been fighting this war for 10,000 years. Another few hours will not matter." With respect, they disagree. Tzeentch reports that the outsider's presence is causing interference. Their emotional signatures do not feed the warp properly. If anything, they seem to be draining it. "Yes, I suspected as much." Abaddon finally turned, his eyes glowing with the barely contained power of the Pantheon. "These Avengers are foreign bodies, contaminants in the system. The warp cannot digest them, and so their presence creates symptoms of rejection." "Then we must destroy them immediately," the apostle declared with fervent loyalty. "Fool!" Abaddon's backhand was a casual flick of his wrist, yet it sent the power-armored apostle crashing against a bulkhead 20 feet away. "Direct assault has failed 3 times. They are too mobile, too adaptable. We require a different approach." He paced the command deck, his strategic mind, honed over 100 crusades, racing through possibilities. The Chaos Gods had given him near unlimited forces, but force alone was proving insufficient. These outsiders fought without the emotional handicaps that plagued Imperial defenders. They had no faith to corrupt, no despair to exploit, no hidden doubts for Tzeentch to amplify. But they did have weaknesses. Everyone did. "The one in green," Abaddon mused, stopping his pacing. "The beast that transforms. I felt Khorne's interest flare when he appeared." "Why?" A sorcerer, robed in the shifting blues of Tzeentch's favor, stepped forward, nervous at being addressed directly. "Lord, that creature's rage is immense. Unlike anything in mortal experience, but it is also unstable. The being that contains it does so imperfectly. If properly pressured, the beast could break free, Abaddon finished. And then? Then we would have a weapon of unprecedented destruction, pointed at whatever we chose. The creature's anger has no loyalty. It simply destroys. Abaddon smiled. It was an expression that had terrified Astartes and demons alike for 10 millennia. Find me someone who can anger a monster. Hours later, as the battle continued to rage, a single vessel detached from the Chaos Fleet. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle, and completely unmarked. It broadcast no weapon signatures, no demonic presence, just a ship with a single passenger. It slid through the defensive grid, ignored by the overwhelmed defenders as merely debris from the ongoing slaughter. It landed in a section of Luna's surface that had been cleared by chaos bombardment. And from it emerged a figure that several Avengers would recognize. Loki Odinson, or rather, a perfect psychic duplicate crafted from Thor's own memories, extracted and given form by Tzeentch's most skilled sorcerers, walked toward the Imperial positions with a smile that promised nothing good. If you want to break a monster, you send something that knows exactly which buttons to push. And the Avengers had more buttons than they realized. Thor felt it before he saw it. A familiar presence, achingly close, yet fundamentally wrong. He was fighting on the orbital platforms, lightning arcing from his form to incinerate swarms of demonic fighters, when the sensation struck him like a physical blow. It was a signature as familiar as his own heartbeat, a flicker of mischief and sharp intellect that could only belong to one being. Loki. It was impossible. Loki was on their Earth, reformed mostly, working his own angles but no longer an active enemy. And yet, the psychic echo was unmistakable. Avengers, Thor spoke into his comm, his voice suddenly tight. I am detecting something. Relocating to investigate. Thor, wait! Steve's voice began, a note of command and caution. But Thor was already gone, a golden comet of purpose streaking away from the orbital battle and down toward the scarred surface of Luna. He found him standing in the ruins of a manufactorum, surrounded by the still warm corpses of chaos cultists. The figure looked exactly as Thor remembered. Sharp features, a knowing, almost bored smile, and the slight, arrogant slouch of someone perpetually unimpressed by his surroundings. Brother, Loki said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of welcome. Did you miss me? How are you here? Thor landed hard enough to crack the ferrocrete, Mjolnir crackling with contained power. The portal brought only the Avengers. The portal brought those who were meant to come, the figure replied, his smile widening. I simply arrived by alternate means. This universe is fascinating, don't you think? So much suffering. So many gods competing for worship. It makes our squabbles on Asgard look positively quaint. Thor wanted to believe. A part of him, a desperate, lonely part, wanted his brother here, fighting alongside him against these impossible odds. But the wrongness persisted. Something in Loki's eyes was too flat, too satisfied. The real Loki was never satisfied. What game are you playing now? Game? The figure laughed, and the sound echoed with a strange, hollow quality. No game, brother. I am here to help. These chaos gods intrigue me. Such power, born from such simple principles. I thought perhaps I might negotiate with them. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened until his knuckles were white. Negotiate? Why not? They want warriors. We want to survive. Surely some arrangement could be reached. You have always been too proud to consider compromise, but you are not Loki. The words fell with the weight of thunder. The figure before Thor froze, its smile flickering for a fraction of a second. "What do you mean?" "My brother is a liar and a schemer and a constant disappointment," Thor said, raising Mjolnir as lightning began to gather around him. "But he would never suggest surrender to creatures of corruption. He despises being controlled more than he values his own life. You are wearing his face, but you do not know his heart." The Loki Thing's expression shifted, the handsome features melting away into something alien and hungry. Clever, but not clever enough. It attacked, not physically, but psychically. A torrent of images flooded Thor's mind. Asgard burning, his father, Odin, dissolving into light, his mother's blood on a dark elf's blade, Thanos breaking his people, killing his brother for real. Every failure, every loss, every moment of weakness dredged up from his soul and amplified into an unbearable wave of shame and grief. "Feel it," the false Loki hissed, its voice distorting into a multi-layered, dissonant chorus. "Feel your weakness, your pride, your failure. Korn wants your rage, Odinson, but Tzeentch wants something better. He wants your doubt." Thor fell to his knees, the psychic assault overwhelming him, targeting vulnerabilities he had never fully healed. He saw himself through a lens of pure criticism. Every arrogant mistake, every life lost because of his pride, every broken promise. "You are not worthy," a voice that sounded like his own whispered in his mind. "You were never worthy." His hand, trembling, began to slip from Mjolnir's handle. And then a new voice cut through the darkness, clean and sharp. "Get away from him!" Steve Rogers stood at the Manufactorum entrance, his shield raised. Behind him, Natasha and Clint had their weapons trained on the false god. "You want his doubts?" Steve said, his voice as cold as the void. "You'll have to go through us first." While the battle for Thor's soul raged on the moon, Robota Guilliman made a decision that would redefine the war. He stood in his command center, watching hololithic displays of the Avengers fighting with a ferocity and hope that felt alien to him. His father had welcomed them, broken 10,000 years of protocol, and Guilliman needed to understand why. "Father," he spoke into the psychic conduit that linked him to the Golden Throne, his voice a low, private murmur, "I require access to the sealed archives." Silence was the only reply for a long moment. Then, a voice that was less sound and more a pressure on reality itself filled his mind. "You seek knowledge that has destroyed those who learned it. What is your purpose?" "I seek the truth about our guests," Guilliman stated, his resolve firm. "You recognized something in them, in the armor the one called Stark wears. I must know what it is." "And if that knowledge breaks you, as it has broken others, then I will break knowing I did everything possible to protect humanity." Another silence, longer this time. Then, deep within the foundations of the Imperial Palace, seals of psychic force that had not been touched for millennia began to dissolve. Guilliman descended into regions of the palace that, according to official records, did not exist. He passed the Genesis forges where the first Space Marines had been created, their metal walls still echoing with the screams of transformation. He moved past laboratories where the 20 Primarchs were gestated in arcane biovats. He walked through corridors lined with stasis cells containing entities so dangerous that even their names had been erased from history. The sealed archives lay beyond all of this. A vault protected by wards that would unmake a continent if breached incorrectly. Guilliman spoke the passphrases his father had just given him, ancient words of power that tasted like dust and regret. The great adamantium doors hissed open. Inside, he found the answers, and they shattered him. "By the throne," he whispered, his augmented senses taking in scrolls and data slates that predated the Imperium itself. They were written in the Emperor's own hand, from a time before he was a god-king, when he was simply a man of impossible age and terrible ambition. They described his visions, not of this universe, but of others. Parallel realities where humanity had taken different paths. Universes where the warp did not exist, where gods were benevolent, where powers beyond imagination waited. And they described his greatest fear. The ultimate threat to humanity, the ancient emperor wrote, is not chaos. Chaos can be fought. The greatest threat is the discovery that our struggle, our suffering, our endless sacrifice is merely one variation among infinite possibilities. If humanity learns that other paths existed, paths that led to hope instead of horror, the faith that sustains this Imperium will shatter. I have hidden this truth. I will always hide it, because knowing there were better options would destroy the only thing keeping us alive, the belief that this darkness was necessary. Gilliman read further. His father had detected incursions from other realities before. Every time he had ensured their silent, absolute elimination. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The Imperium could not survive knowing what it had lost. But these Avengers were different. They hadn't been eliminated. They had been welcomed by the Emperor himself. The final document provided the answer. "If I ever permit outsiders to survive," the Emperor's script read, "it will mean I have finally accepted what I denied for so long, that the Imperium is failing beyond recovery, that my methods cannot save us, that we require something from beyond our reality to provide what we have forgotten how to provide ourselves. If you are reading this, my son, then I have made that admission. And you must understand what it means. I am no longer strong enough to save humanity alone. Help them. Help them help us. And pray to whatever you believe in that they are enough." Guilliman stood in the darkness of the sealed archives, the weight of 10,000 years of lies pressing down on him. His father built an empire on the suppression of hope. And now, facing extinction, he had brought hope back in the form of heroes who didn't know enough to despair. The question echoed in the silent vault. Was hope enough to win the war? Or would it simply make the fall harder when it arrived? The battle for Thor's soul reached its breaking point. Steve's shield deflected a psychic blast that sought to turn his own patriotism into fanatical hatred. Natasha fired specialized ammunition designed by Tony using knowledge from the armor's secret files that screamed into the false Loki, disrupting its warp energy on impact. Clint's arrows landed in a precise triangle around the kneeling god, creating shimmering null field pockets that shielded their minds from the worst of Tzeentch's influence. But the false Loki was powerful. A greater demon wearing borrowed flesh, it channeled the full attention of the Changer of Ways. Every attack they landed, it adapted. Every strategy they attempted, it anticipated. "Your resistance is admirable," it said, its voice a perfect imitation of Loki's mocking tone as it circled the kneeling Thor. "But futile. I have been playing games of the mind since before your species learned to walk. Your friend here will join me, not because I force him, but because I've shown him the truth of himself. Every hero is a villain who hasn't been pushed far enough." Thor's hand, still gripping Mjolnir, was weak. The hammer refused to respond to his call. Or rather, his doubt had made him unworthy to wield it. Everything the creature showed him was true. He had failed. He had fallen. He was not the god he pretended to be. "Thor?" Steve's voice cut through the psychic noise, raw and insistent. "Look at me." Thor raised his head. Through the haze of despair, he saw Captain America, a man with no powers beyond his own determination, standing against a being of cosmic evil, refusing to back down. "Remember what I told you in the chapel? About sacrifice and hope?" "I remember." "Disappointment," Thor managed. The creature's psychic poison still working on him. "The road to—" "Forget that. Listen to this." Steve's voice carried a conviction that seemed to physically push back the darkness. "Every failure you've experienced, every mistake you've made, they're not proof that you're unworthy. They're proof that you tried, that you kept trying despite knowing you might fail. Worthiness isn't about perfection. It's about getting up every time you fall. About facing yourself honestly and choosing to be better anyway." The false Loki laughed, a sound that was pure derision. "Inspiring words. But words won't." "Shut up," Natasha said, and fired a single, concentrated null bolt directly into the creature's face. It screamed, not from pain, but from disconnection. For a fraction of a second, Tzeentch's link was severed, and the false Loki became merely a puppet with cut strings. In that moment of absolute silence, Thor remembered. Not his failures, not his losses. He remembered standing on the Bifrost with his real brother, facing impossible odds, and Loki saying, with that infuriating, unbreakable confidence, "I assure you, brother, the sun will shine on us again." Even at his worst, even in his darkest moments, Loki believed in the future, believed in the possibility of redemption. The creature wearing his face didn't know that, couldn't know it, because that hope came from a place the Chaos Gods had never touched. Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. "You are not my brother!" Lightning exploded outward, not just electrical energy, but the pure, uncorrupted power of Asgard itself, channeled through a god who had chosen to believe in himself again. The false Loki's form tore apart, the greater demon within revealed in all its impossible, shifting geometry. And Thor, god of thunder, prince of Asgard, rose to face it. "Your master wanted my doubt," Thor said, the hammer blazing with a light that was clean and absolute. "Instead, you reminded me what I fight for." He struck. Not with anger. Anger feeds them. Not with despair. Despair strengthens them. He struck with purpose, with the accumulated hope of everyone who had ever believed in him. The greater demon of Tzeentch died screaming, its death cry echoing across the warp, a sound of pure negation. And somewhere in the Imperium, Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the god who knew all possibilities, felt something it had not experienced in millions of years. Surprise. Bruce Banner stood at the center of a null field generator array, the air around him cold and dead, stripped of all psychic resonance. He was surrounded by the most advanced containment systems the Imperium could provide, a ring of humming machinery and silent, watchful guardians. Beyond the reinforced plasteel, tech priests and sisters of silence maintained the delicate balance of technology and anti-psyker presence. "Are you certain about this?" Roberta Guilliman's voice, filtered through the observation window's comms, was a low rumble of pragmatic concern. "If your theory is wrong." "If I'm wrong, this universe has bigger problems than one rampaging Hulk." Bruce took a deep, shuddering breath, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing demonic incursions across the system. "But I'm not wrong. I've run the calculations. Our emotional signatures are incompatible with the warp. If I can maintain calibration while the Hulk operates at full capacity, We can create a field of psychic interference that will cripple demon manifestation across the entire Terran system. And if you cannot maintain calibration, the Primarch's question was not an accusation, but a necessary clarification of risk. Then the Hulk will rampage, probably destroying significant portions of your moon base before you can stop him. Bruce's smile was grim, a flash of gallows humor in the face of apocalypse. Like I said, bigger problems. Guilliman stared at the small, unassuming man for a long moment, weighing the potential destruction of his infrastructure against the certain destruction of his Imperium. The choice was not a choice at all. He nodded slowly. Do it. Bruce closed his eyes. For years, he had worked with the Hulk, developing protocols, establishing communication, building something approaching a partnership. Now he was going to throw all of that away. Maximum power, minimum control, held together only by his ability to maintain psychological focus while his body transformed into something else entirely. Ready, big guy? A low growl echoed in the back of his mind, a thought formed of pure power. Ready. Smash gods. Break things that eat pain. Not break things. Disrupt things. Interfere with things. Can you do that without just breaking? A rumble that might have been a laugh, deep and tectonic. Hulk is strongest there is. Even control is strength. Bruce had no idea if that was true, but he had no choice but to find out. Beginning transformation, he announced, his voice steady. The change came faster than it ever had before. Usually, Bruce fought it, slowing the process through sheer willpower. Now he welcomed it, opening every door he had spent years barricading shut. Gamma radiation flooded his cells. His body expanded, muscles layering over muscles, bones thickening beyond human limits. And his mind. This was the hard part. Usually, transformation meant Banner retreating, letting the Hulk take the wheel. But now, he had to stay present, stay aware. He had to ride the tsunami of rage, not to steer it, but to tune its frequency, to calibrate the very essence of its anger into a weapon. The Hulk emerged, 12 feet of green fury straining against containment that suddenly seemed very inadequate. His roar shook the laboratory to its foundations, cracks spreading through reinforced walls. Tech priests scrambled backward, their augmetics screaming warnings. The Sisters of Silence stood their ground, their null presence creating islands of stability in the psychic chaos. And from the Hulk, from Banner within Hulk, something emerged. It was not visible to normal senses, but every psyker on Terra felt it. A wave of absolute wrongness spreading outward. Not corruption, the opposite of corruption. It was like static on a signal, a blast of white noise that drowned out the whispers of the warp. Across the Sol system, demons began to flicker. It's working, Guilliman breathed from the observation deck. The manifestations are destabilizing. The Hulk roared again, but this time there was something else in the sound. Not just rage, purpose. The creature who had always been Banner's curse was becoming something else. A living weapon against entities that had preyed on suffering for eternity. Hulk is strongest there is, the green giant rumbled, his voice a physical force. Gods eat anger, Hulk angry at gods. He turned toward the containment wall, his massive fists raised, knuckles the size of boulders. Time to see if gods can eat what Hulk feeds them. The armor's secrets had revealed something Tony Stark could barely comprehend, a weapon capable of killing gods. But the cost, the Emperor's life, was a line he would not cross. So Tony did what he always did when faced with an unacceptable choice. He built a better one. In a laboratory commandeered from the Adeptus Mechanicus, surrounded by components from two universes, he worked. Arc reactor technology mingled with Imperial power cells. Asgardian lightning captured from Thor's battles was stored in containment fields alongside Prometheum reserves. And at the center of it all, a crystalline matrix from the armor itself. That strange, impossible, solidified possibility. Friday, status on the alternative power configuration? Tony asked, his voice strained. Boss, this is literally impossible, the AI responded, her tone reflecting the logical fallacy of the task. The energy requirements alone. I didn't ask if it was possible. I asked for the status. The principle was elegant in its insanity. Instead of drawing power from the Emperor, the device would draw from the Avengers themselves. Each of them represented an emotional state, a psychic signature that did not properly resonate with the warp. If those dissonant energies could be amplified and projected, they could create a dead zone, a region where the warp could not function. Pure, clean reality. I have to talk to Steve, Tony muttered, patching a private comm link. He found the captain coordinating defenses on Luna. Cap, I need a minute. What is it, Tony? The armor. It came with a blueprint. A weapon to kill the Chaos Gods. Tony took a breath. But it's powered by the Emperor. Using it kills him. We trade one tyrant for 4. We don't trade lives, Steve said instantly. What's the alternative? Us, Tony said, the word hanging heavy in the air. The device can be reconfigured. Instead of a weapon, a shield. A permanent dead zone where chaos can't touch them. But it needs power. It would have to draw from all of us. Our emotional energy, our life force, our connection to our own universe. When it's done, we might not have enough left to get home. Steve was quiet for a long moment, the sounds of distant battle filtering through the comm. You're asking if we should make this sacrifice? No, Tony corrected, his voice raw. I'm asking if I have the right to ask you to make it. Back home, I made a lot of decisions alone. It didn't end well. This time, I want to do it right. Steve's voice, when it came, was calm and clear. There's another way to look at this, Tony. What if we don't use the device to kill the gods? What if we use it to give humanity a chance? Explain. You said it creates a zone where the warp doesn't work. A safe harbor. Not a final victory, but survival. A chance for them to become something better than what this universe forced them to be. A chance. That's all anyone can ask for. Tony looked at the device taking shape in his laboratory. A weapon to kill gods or a shield to protect humanity. The choice seemed obvious when framed that way. And us? Tony asked, needing to hear the cost spoken aloud. We'd be stuck here, probably. Depleted. Maybe dying. I've died before, Steve said quietly. More than once. If it means saving people, giving them hope, I can do it again. A weight settled in Tony's chest, but it wasn't despair. It was resolve. I'll need to modify the design. Shift from offensive to defensive applications. How long? Hours. Maybe less if I don't sleep. Then don't sleep. Steve's voice carried a hint of a smile. I'll tell the team. We'll buy you the time. The Chaos Fleet parted like a rotten curtain, revealing the nightmares that had been waiting behind. The void itself seemed to recoil as 4 regions of reality became indistinguishable from the warp. The demon Primarchs, greatest and most terrible champions of the Chaos Gods, had answered the call to war. Magnus the Red came first, a being of impossible fire and contradictory geometry. Once the greatest sorcerer among the Emperor's sons, he now existed as a living conduit for Tzeentch's infinite schemes. His single cyclopean eye blazed with knowledge that would shatter mortal minds, and the fabric of space-time bent and warped around him like light around a black hole. Mortarion followed, his massive, bloated form carrying the weight of 10 millennia of pestilence. The Death Lord's presence alone caused systems to fail, ceramite to rust, and hope to wither into dust. Grotesque plague-bearers spilled from his shadow like maggots from a corpse, and the air thickened with the scent of galactic decay. Then came Angron, crashing against Terra's outer defenses like a meteor of pure rage. The World Eater's Primarch had no strategy, no subtlety, only the endless, screaming hunger for skulls that Khorne had stoked for 10,000 years. His twin chain axes, Gore-Father and Gore-Child, had drunk the blood of worlds, and they thirsted for the blood of a god. Finally, emerging from a dimension of sensation that existed perpendicular to reality, Fulgrim appeared. The Phoenician had long abandoned any pretense of humanity. His serpentine form writhed with an impossible, agonizing beauty, each iridescent scale a captured soul. Each graceful movement a symphony of pleasure and pain that promised ecstasy and oblivion in equal measure. On the command deck, Carol Danvers watched the tactical display update with the 4 new catastrophic signatures. "Oh dear," she muttered, the understatement hanging in the tense air. "Those are the corrupted brothers?" "Those are 4 of them," Guilliman responded, his voice tight as a drawn bowstring. "Magnus, Mortarion, Angron, Fulgrim. Each commands legions of traitor Astartes and demonic hosts. Together, they have broken crusades that outnumbered them 10,000 to 1. "Any weaknesses?" Steve asked, his eyes locked on the hololith. "They were my brothers once. I knew their weaknesses better than anyone." Guilliman's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. "Now they are something else. Their weaknesses have been forged into strengths. Their strengths have become something terrible." Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir crackling with contained power. "I will face the Red One, the Sorcerer." "Magic is a language I understand." Guilliman looked at him. "Magnus the Red has been practicing sorcery since before your civilization could write its own name. He has spent 10,000 years deepening his power in the warp." "And I am Thor Odinson, god of thunder," he replied, lightning wrapping around him like armor. "I have faced the cosmos itself and survived. Your brother needs to learn what a real god looks like." Steve nodded, his tactical mind processing the impossible variables. "We divide their attention. Thor, you're on Magnus. Carol, on Angron. You're fast enough to avoid his berserker rushes. Nat, Clint, you're with me. We face Mortarion. We don't have to beat him. We just have to contain him and his plagues." "What about the serpent?" Natasha asked, her gaze fixed on Fulgrim's hypnotic, coiling form. "The serpent is mine," Guilliman said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous quiet. "Fulgrim was my brother in truth, not just creation. We fought together, laughed together, debated philosophy through long campaigns. He is what I might have become if I had made different choices." "That's exactly why you shouldn't face him alone," Steve argued. "No." Guilliman's voice was final, carrying the weight of ages. "This is personal. It has been personal since he laid me low on Thessaly. I need to end this. Not for the Imperium. For myself." Steve held the Primarch's gaze for a long moment, seeing the pain and resolve warring in his eyes. He nodded. Tony's working on something that might end this war permanently. We need to buy him time." "How much time?" Carol asked. "As much as we can give him." Gilliman drew his father's sword. The blade ignited, blazing with a holy fire that made even the Avengers blink. "Then let us give the architect his time," the Primarch declared. "Today, we remind the galaxy what heroes look like." Captain Marvel hit Angron at approximately 1/10 the speed of light. The impact was not a sound, it was a physical event that erased sound. A silent, blinding flash of golden energy vaporized the ground where the demon Primarch stood, and the resulting shock wave flattened ruined structures across 3 square kilometers. The force was absolute, a kinetic equation solved with the mass of a small moon. For one beautiful, impossible moment, Carol Danvers thought this might be easier than expected. The World Eater staggered, actually staggered, a single step back, his colossal form shuddering. Then Angron laughed. It was a wet, grating sound, like continents of rock and bone grinding together, a roar of pure, ecstatic joy. "Yes!" he bellowed, his voice tearing through the air. The twin chain axes, Gorefather and Gorechild, spun up with a hungry scream. "Finally! Something that hits back!" His counterblow came faster than anything that massive should move. Carol dodged, the instinct of 1,000 battles saving her, but the displaced air alone was a physical blow. A vacuum punch that threw her off course. She recovered in a microsecond, pushing her power into its binary form, her body becoming a living star. She launched a stellar intensity blast, a concentrated spear of solar fire, directly at his center mass. Angron walked through it. The cosmic energy, hot enough to melt adamantium, simply washed over his demonic hide, hissing and dissipating like water on a forge. "Okay," Carol muttered into the void, her mind racing. "So he's durable." "I am the chosen of Khorne," Angron roared, closing the distance with impossible loping strides that devoured the battlefield. "I have bathed in the blood of worlds. Your light does not burn. It merely illuminates my glory." They clashed again, a maelstrom of golden light and rusted, blood-caked iron. Carol was faster, a hummingbird of cosmic destruction. Her attacks capable of vaporizing conventional matter. He was relentless, inexhaustible, his fury and strength actually increasing with every blow he took and every swing he made. Each exchange of violence, she realized, was a prayer. Every punch she landed, every blast he endured, was an offering to the altar of the blood god. The more effective she was as a warrior, the stronger her enemy became. She had to fight different, smarter, not harder. Carol broke off the engagement, accelerating to speeds that blurred even to her enhanced perception. She stopped attacking. Instead, she began circling Angron in a tightening, incandescent spiral. She wasn't striking him. She was containing him, weaving a cage of starlight, a vortex of pure cosmic energy that held him in place through sheer, continuous force. "Coward!" Angron howled, swinging his axes at the shimmering walls of her energy field. The blades scraped against the vortex, sending up showers of impossible sparks, but they couldn't break through. "Face me!" "No thanks," Carol called down, her voice echoing in the energy prison. "I have seen what happens when I face you directly. You enjoy it too much." "Release me!" "Let me think about that." "No." The vortex intensified. Angron's rage spiked to a fever pitch, but without a target to hit, without blood to shed, it began to turn inward. The demon Primarch, a being defined by the act of slaughter, experienced something he had not felt in 10,000 years. Frustration, without the release of violence. His demonic form began to flicker. Khorne's gifts were designed for endless warfare, not stalemate. Without the act of killing, the Primarch's connection to his patron began to fray. "You know what I learned fighting guys like you?" Carol's voice was calm, cutting through his roars. "Brute force isn't about who hits hardest. It's about who controls the tempo. And right now, buddy, I control everything." Angron screamed. It was a new sound, different from his roars of rage. It was the sound of something approaching panic. His entire existence was the joy of the kill. Take that away, and he was just a monster in a cage, a god of war with nothing to fight. Carol maintained the vortex, feeling her own immense energy reserves begin to deplete under the strain. But she held steady. She didn't need to defeat Angron. She just needed to keep him out of the fight long enough for Tony to finish his work. "I will tear out your spine," Angron promised, still thrashing against the cosmic containment. "I will drink your soul." "You'll have to catch me first," Carol responded, a grim smile on her face. "And something tells me you're not great at patience." The stalemate held. 1 demon Primarch contained. 3 to go. The duel between gods took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Thor's lightning, a force that had shattered mountains, struck Magnus the Red and was absorbed. It did not dissipate. It was consumed, unraveled, and rewoven into screaming psychic fire that lashed back at its source. The god of thunder deflected with a swing of Mjolnir, the hammer's ancient Uru enchantments, providing a defense that conventional physics could not explain. A bulwark against a reality being weaponized against him. "Your weapon is impressive," Magnus observed, his voice echoing through layers of real space, a calm pronouncement amidst a storm of cosmic chaos. "I sense ancient bindings within it, a legacy of powers your people have long forgotten." "I don't need to understand my weapon to use it," Thor growled, and hurled Mjolnir in an arc that tore through 6 different planes of existence at once. "I need only to strike." Magnus made a simple gesture, and the hammer halted in mid-flight, held fast by pure will. "Impressive, but in the warp, thought shapes reality. And I have spent 10,000 years learning to think in ways that would shatter your mind." The demon Primarch's single cyclopean eye blazed, and suddenly Thor was somewhere else. He stood on the Rainbow Bridge as Asgard burned, Ragnarok playing out in accelerated, agonizing time. He watched his people die, felt their souls screaming as they were consumed by something vast and hungry. "This is illusion," Thor snarled, fighting against the crushing weight of memory and grief. "Is it?" Magnus's voice was inside his head now. "The future is merely a thought that has not yet become real. I can show you every possible doom, every potential ending where everything you love is destroyed." Mjolnir, freed by Thor's reasserted will, returned to his hand, its passage cutting through the vision like lightning through shadow. The burning city of Asgard dissolved into the swirling madness of the warp. "You mistake me for someone who fears the future. I have lived through Ragnarok. I have died and returned. Your visions hold no power over me. Then let us test your present." Magnus attacked with sorcery that would level cities, psychic blades that cut through space itself, waves of transmutation that attempted to turn Thor's divine flesh to screaming glass, temporal loops that trapped him in the same instant of pain, repeated infinitely. Thor endured. Thor fought. This was what he understood. The enemy before him was once a scholar, a seeker of knowledge who fell to darkness through pride. Magnus believed that understanding equaled power, that enough knowledge could solve any problem. But Thor knew something Magnus had forgotten. Some truths cannot be learned. They can only be lived. "You read the future," Thor said, pushing through psychic fire that would incinerate lesser beings. "You see what will happen. Tell me, what do you see in mine?" Magnus paused, his omniscient eye focusing with terrible intensity. For a long moment, the Crimson King, the favored son of Tzeentch, searched the infinite, tangled threads of fate for the tapestry of Thor's life, and found nothing. "Impossible," the demon Primarch whispered, his composure finally breaking. The space where Thor's destiny should be was a void, a blank spot in the grand scheme. "We are from outside your reality," Thor declared, his voice ringing with newfound certainty. "Your gods did not weave our fates. Your warp did not shape our souls." He raised Mjolnir, and lightning began to gather. Not just electrical energy, but the power of an entirely different cosmic system, clean and pure. "You cannot see our futures, because we were never supposed to exist in your universe." Magnus recoiled. Tzeentch's gift of foresight, his greatest weapon, his most profound advantage, had become useless. For the first time in millennia, the Crimson King faced an opponent he could not predict. "What are you?" Magnus demanded, a tremor of genuine fear in his voice. "I am hope," Thor answered, his eyes blazing with the light of 1,000 stars. "I am the variable you cannot account for. I am the proof that not all futures are written." The god of thunder struck. Magnus's psychic wards shattered. His defensive sorcery failed. In this moment, facing something that existed outside his patron's grand and terrible plan, the demon Primarch was vulnerable, and Thor exploited that vulnerability with all the power of a god who had chosen to believe in victory. While the Titans clashed in duels that tore at the fabric of reality, Natasha Romanoff led a very different kind of assault. The Hulk's interference field had created pockets of weakened warp presence across the battlefield, regions where demon manifestation was unreliable, where psychic powers flickered and failed. Natasha had spent hours studying these dead zones, mapping their locations, calculating their movements. Now, she led Clint and Steve through the chaos of battle toward a target that none of the Imperium's forces had ever considered: the vengeful spirit itself. "Boarding a flagship during an active engagement," Clint muttered, firing an arrow that pinned a chaos cultist to a bulkhead. "This feels like old times." "Old times were easier," Steve responded, his shield deflecting a volley of bolter rounds. "These enemies don't negotiate." "Actually, some of them do," Natasha said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the explosions around them. "I've been monitoring their communications. The Chaos forces aren't unified. The gods are cooperating because they have to, not because they want to. If we can reach Abaddon directly, we might be able to create complications." Their insertion point was a breach in the vengeful spirit's hull, damage from Carol's earlier attack that hadn't been fully repaired. Natasha led them through corridors that reeked of corruption, past murals depicting 10,000 years of hatred and betrayal. The ship's internal defenses activated, not as automated systems, but as living things. Walls sprouted mouths that screamed warnings. Floors became sticky with suddenly manifested blood. The ship itself was trying to digest them. Clint, left corridor. Steve, overhead hatch. "Move!" Natasha commanded. They fought through the living nightmare. These three had operated together for years, their coordination approaching telepathy. Where Steve created openings with his shield, Clint exploited them with impossible precision. Where enemies clustered, Natasha redirected them into each other with a dancer's brutal grace. They were a scalpel in a war of sledgehammers. "Bridge is ahead," Natasha reported, checking her tactical display. "Abaddon's throne room. Intelligence suggests he'll be coordinating the assault personally." "So we walk in and—" "What? Ask him to stop?" Clint asked, knocking another arrow. "We walk in and present him with information about what Tzeentch has been planning behind his back," Natasha explained. The Changer of Ways didn't send that fake Loki just to break Thor. He was testing how the other gods would react, gathering data for his own schemes. Steve's eyes widened behind his cowl. "You have evidence?" "Thor's battle created psychic residue. I analyzed it while you were all fighting. Tzeentch has been preparing to betray the Alliance the moment it serves his interests. Abaddon probably suspects, but he doesn't have proof. I'm going to give him just enough to make him paranoid, enough to make him hesitate at a critical moment." The bridge doors loomed before them, massive portals carved with scenes of the heresy, a monument to a brother's betrayal. "This is insane," Clint observed flatly. "This is Tuesday," Natasha responded, and pushed the doors open. Abaddon the Despoiler sat upon a throne of screaming souls, surrounded by the elite of his Black Legion. His Talon of Horus, a massive power claw that had once slain a Primarch and wounded an Emperor, flexed as he regarded the three mortals who had dared to enter his sanctum. "You have courage," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "Coming here, to my own ship, while your allies fight for their lives outside." "We came to talk," Natasha said calmly, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Talk?" Abaddon laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "What could you possibly say that would interest me?" "How about this?" Natasha replied, her gaze unwavering. "Tzeentch is going to betray you in exactly 43 minutes. The laughter stopped. In the ruins of a cathedral that once celebrated the Emperor's divinity, two brothers who were never truly brothers faced each other at last. Fulgrim was beautiful, even transformed into a demon serpent. Even with his soul utterly consumed by Slanesh's excesses, he retained an aesthetic perfection that made looking at him a painful, exquisite experience. Each iridescent scale reflected light in hypnotic patterns that triggered pleasure centers in the brain. His voice, when he spoke, carried harmonics that promised ecstasy beyond mortal imagining. "Robute," he purred, his colossal form coiling through the rubble of fallen statues and shattered stained glass. "How long has it been?" "Centuries. You've become so stern. And you've become an abomination." Guilliman kept his father's sword raised, its holy light creating a tangible barrier against Fulgrim's corrupting aura. "I remember when you cared about beauty that elevated the spirit. Now you peddle beauty that only degrades. Beauty is beauty, brother. The distinction you draw is arbitrary, the invention of minds too small to appreciate the infinite spectrum of sensation." They circled each other, the serpent and the statesman. Their last battle had nearly killed Guilliman. The wound Fulgrim inflicted had taken 10,000 years to properly heal. Now they were both changed, Guilliman harder, colder, more pragmatic. Fulgrim more powerful, but also more hollow, his endless pursuit of sensation having consumed everything that once made him worthwhile. "I used to envy you," Guilliman admitted, his voice low and steady. "Your creativity, your passion, the way you could take broken things and make them perfect. You can still envy me. Join me." Fulgrim's voice became honey-sweet, a venomous temptation. "The Imperium is dying, Robute. Our father is a corpse on a throne, a screaming ghost in a machine. Everything we built has rotted into something barely worth defending. But Slaanesh offers an eternity of feeling. Endless sensation, endless perfection, endless life. At what cost? Guilliman asked, though he knew the answer. Only everything that limits you. Conscience, restraint, the pathetic, deluded hope that suffering has meaning. Fulgrim's smile was devastating, a weapon in itself. You know I'm right. You've spent 2 centuries trying to save something that is unsavable. Wouldn't it feel good, just for a moment, to stop pretending? The temptation was real, a poison seeping into the cracks of his weariness. Guilliman had carried the weight of the Imperium on his shoulders for longer than most civilizations exist. He had watched his reforms fail, his hopes wither, his best efforts amount to nothing more than holding back the dark for one more day. But then he thought of the Avengers. He thought of Steve Rogers, who kept fighting because giving up was simply not in his nature. He thought of Thor, who chose hope despite having witnessed the death of his own gods. He thought of Tony Stark, building miracles because someone had to. They came from a universe where heroes still existed, where good could triumph, where the future wasn't written in blood and despair. If they could believe in hope, then Guilliman could too. You're right about one thing, he said, adjusting his grip on the burning sword. Our father is dying. The Imperium is failing. Everything I've worked for may amount to nothing. Fulgrim's smile widened, sensing victory. But you're wrong about the rest, Guilliman continued, his eyes blazing with a fire that hadn't been there for centuries. Suffering does have meaning. It's the fire that forges strength. Conscience isn't a limitation. It is what separates existence from mere survival. And hope. He leveled his father's sword at his fallen brother. Hope is the only weapon our enemies cannot corrupt. He attacked. The battle between Primarchs shook the foundations of Terra itself. Fulgrim's demon speed against Guilliman's perfected technique. Slaanesh's unnatural gifts against the Emperor's own blade. And slowly, impossibly, Guilliman began to win. He was not stronger. Fulgrim had 10,000 years of demonic enhancement. He was not faster. The serpent moved like thought itself. He was winning because he had something Fulgrim had surrendered long ago, a reason to fight that was not about himself. Abaddon the Despoiler regarded Natasha Romanoff with eyes that had seen empires burn to ash. His massive form, clad in the black and gold of the sons of Horus, was motionless upon a throne of screaming, petrified souls. The air on the bridge of the vengeful spirit was thick with the stench of ozone, ancient hatred, and something that might have been prayer. You claim Tzeentch will betray me in 43 minutes, he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the deck plates. Explain. Gladly. Natasha gestured, and a device on her wrist projected holographic data into the space between them. Reconstructed from the psychic residue of Thor's battle with the false Loki, the display was a complex web of energy signatures and temporal probabilities, enhanced by the analytical systems of Tony's armor. The psychic duplicate that attacked our teammate wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a probe. Tzeentch used it to test how the other gods would respond to one of us being removed from the battle. And? Abaddon's tone was dangerously flat. And the responses were illuminating, she continued, her voice calm and steady. When Thor seemed to be falling, Khorne's forces pressed harder, trying to claim the kill for their master. Nurgle's troops actually pulled back, as if waiting for a different outcome. Slaanesh's agents, well, they were mostly focused on Fulgrim's duel with your brother. The War Master's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of ancient paranoia, honed over 10 millennia of treachery. The changer of ways is always scheming. This is not new information. No, but this is, Natasha said. Tzeentch has calculated that if the battle continues as planned, you will win. The Imperium falls, chaos is triumphant, and the great game ends. Except Tzeentch doesn't want the game to end. He wants the war to continue forever. A stalemate feeding his power indefinitely. So in approximately 40 minutes, he's going to leak information to the Imperium about a weakness in your fleet formation. Not enough to turn the battle, but just enough to prevent your total victory. You have proof? I have temporal analysis showing that Tzeentch's forces are pre-positioning for a configuration that only makes sense if they expect the defensive line to hold. I have communication intercepts suggesting his sorcerers have been in contact with elements inside the Imperial Palace. And I have this. She held up a small crystalline data chip. Recordings from the future. Or a possible future, at least. One where your crusade fails because Tzeentch decided he preferred the game to the victory. Abaddon stared at the crystal. Where did you obtain this? That's complicated. The short version is that someone is playing games with this universe, and they want to see what happens when old patterns break. For a long moment, silence filled the throne room. The Chaos Space Marines of the Black Legion shifted nervously, their loyalty absolute, but their awareness of their master's moods highly developed. Then Abaddon laughed. It was a different sound than before, less theatrical, more genuine, like grinding stone. You're trying to manipulate me, turn me against my allies. Classic intelligence work. Is it working? Natasha asked. That depends. Abaddon leaned forward, his massive form somehow becoming more threatening through mere posture. What do you want in exchange for this information? 48 hours, she replied without hesitation. Pull your fleet back for 48 hours. That's all. Why? Because in 48 hours, something is going to change the rules of this war permanently. And when it does, you're going to want to be positioned to take advantage of the chaos. Pun intended. Abaddon studied her, this baseline human who had walked onto his flagship, and bargained with the War Master of Chaos. He saw no fear in her, no deception, just the cold calculation of someone who had made peace with impossible odds. Interesting, he said finally. You remind me of someone I knew long ago, someone who saw the galaxy as a game to be played. Is that a yes? It's a, let me see what happens. If your information proves accurate. He gestured with the talon of Horus, and the Black Legion parted, creating a path to the exit. Then, perhaps, we'll talk again. Natasha nodded, turning to leave with Steve and Clint. One more thing, Abaddon called after them. Your friends outside. They're losing. Even if I pull back, the demon Primarchs won't. I know, Natasha said, without looking back. That's why we have the Hulk. The interference field had done its work. Across the blasted surface of Luna, and in the void above, demons flickered and dissolved, their manifestations unstable, their connection to the warp a frayed and shrieking thing. But the demon Primarchs were not ordinary demons. They were anchored by 10,000 years of worship, sustained by the direct, unwavering attention of their patron gods. Against them, the Hulk's psychic static was merely a hindrance, an irritating hum in the symphony of damnation. It was not enough. From within his containment zone, a low growl shook the very foundations of the laboratory. The Hulk watched the battle on a dozen displays, his emerald eyes burning with an intelligence that terrified the attending tech priests. More! he rumbled, the single word a command that cracked the reinforced plasteel of the viewing window. "We are at maximum output," a tech priest stammered, his augmented senses screaming at the gamma radiation flooding the chamber. Any further escalation risks, containment failure, structural collapse. Hulk knows what Hulk risks. Hulk chooses. Bruce Banner, still a conscious pilot within the Emerald Giant, felt the decision form before the Hulk even spoke it. This wasn't a request for more power. It was a demand for complete control. Not the partnership they had spent years building, but a reversion to the pure, unfiltered rage that had defined his earliest transformations. A state of being so absolute that Banner himself might be consumed by it. If I let go, Banner thought, the message a whisper in the storm of the Hulk's mind, I might not come back. The response was not a growl, but a clear, shockingly coherent thought, forged in the crucible of their shared existence. If you don't let go, everyone dies. Hulk doesn't want everyone to die. It was the most sophisticated reasoning Banner had ever heard from his other half. The creature born from his pain had evolved. It understood sacrifice. It could choose to destroy itself for a purpose greater than its own anger. "Do it," Banner whispered aloud, his voice lost in the hum of the failing machinery. "I trust you." The transformation was unlike anything that had come before. The Hulk's form didn't just grow, it erupted. His size doubled, then tripled, his skin shifting from emerald green to a shade of black so deep it seemed to drink the light, shot through with veins of pure, terrifying gamma radiation. The interference field that had been spreading across the battlefield like a wave simply exploded outward, carried on a roar of rage so profound it tore a hole in the psychic spectrum. Gods think they understand anger. The creature that was no longer just the Hulk bellowed, its voice echoing not through air, but through the soul of every living thing in the system. Gods are wrong. The demon Primarchs felt it instantly. Magnus, locked in a duel of cosmic will with Thor, suddenly lost access to vast portions of his power as his connection to the warp frayed into nothing. Mortarian's suffocating plague aura faltered, the Viridian clouds thinning as his demonic host dissolved around him. Angron, still trapped in Carol Danvers' vortex of light, felt the endless river of bloodlust from Khorne slow to a trickle. And Fulgrim, locked in a deadly dance with Guilliman, experienced something unprecedented: sobriety. The constant, ecstatic whispers of Slanesh, the endless flood of sensation that had defined his existence for 10 millennia, were silenced. For the first time since his fall, the Phoenician stood in the quiet of his own mind. The emptiness drove him to his knees, screaming. "What is this?" The Primarchs howled in a dissonant chorus of fury and confusion. "What have you done?" The Hulk, now 300 feet tall and still growing, a colossus of dark green rage and stellar fire, turned his burning eyes toward them. "Hulk is strongest there is, strongest in Hulk's universe, strongest in your universe, strongest in any universe." He raised a fist that could shatter moons. "Now Hulk proves it!" The first blow landed on Magnus the Red. It was a strike that crossed dimensions, a fist of pure, incompatible rage that hit the demon Primarch not just physically, but psychically. The Crimson King was hurled backward through reality itself, his impossible form cracking, actually damaged by the sheer unholy force of the impact. "Your gods made you powerful," the Hulk declared, already turning toward his next target. "But Hulk's power doesn't come from gods. Hulk's power comes from Hulk. And Hulk is angry." Tony Stark had never worked faster, never felt more alive, and never been closer to death. In his commandeered laboratory, the device was beautiful, a crystalline sphere containing energies from 6 different, impossible sources, all calibrated to produce an effect that defied the laws of this universe. Carol's cosmic fire, Thor's divine lightning, Steve's indomitable will, Natasha's calculated precision, Clint's perfect focus, and the Hulk's rage, currently being broadcast across the entire system like a scream that silenced gods. Friday. Status, he managed, his voice a ragged whisper. All systems nominal, boss. The Avengers' energies are integrating successfully. But I'm registering concerning readings from your own biosystems. Ignore them. Focus on the calibration. Boss, your heart rate is 180 and climbing. Your blood pressure is reaching critical levels. Friday. Focus. The device required one more component. Tony himself. His intellect, his creativity, his stubborn, arrogant refusal to accept impossible odds. The blue armor had been designed for this very moment, to channel its wearer's essence into a weapon that could challenge the fundamental nature of reality. You know, he murmured, his hands moving with a speed that belied their tremor as he slid the final component into place. When I built the first Iron Man suit, I was just trying to survive. When I built Ultron, I was trying to protect everyone from threats I couldn't control. And now I'm building something that might save a universe that isn't even mine. Pepper would say I have a hero complex. The device hummed to life. Tony felt its pull, not painful, but an insistent, hungry draw on his very soul. It wanted his energy, his essence, his connection to everything that made him Tony Stark. Friday, he asked, his eyes fixed on the growing light. If this works, if the device creates a permanent dead zone in this universe, will we have enough power left to get home? Uncertain, boss. The energy requirements for the final stabilization may leave us stranded. But it'll work? The dead zone will protect humanity? Models suggest a 94.6% probability of success. Tony considered it. 94.6%, odds of saving quadrillions of lives, at the cost of possibly never seeing Earth again, never seeing Pepper, never meeting the future he had fought so hard for. It should have been a hard choice. It wasn't. Begin the sequence. Boss, begin the sequence, Friday. Light poured from the crystalline sphere, not ordinary light, but something that existed in colors human eyes had never evolved to see. It spread outward, touching the fabric of reality itself, creating calm where there should be chaos. Tony felt himself pouring into the light, his memories, his fears, his hopes, all becoming fuel for the device's impossible purpose. In the throne room of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon watched in disbelief as something unprecedented happened. The warp itself, the very ocean of his power, began to withdraw from Terran space. On the battlefield, the demon Primarchs felt their connection to their patron gods severing. Not temporarily, but potentially forever. And on the Golden Throne, the Emperor of Mankind perceived what Tony Stark was attempting. Not a weapon to kill gods, but a shield to protect humanity. A sacrifice made not from desperation, but from hope. Plus Stark plus. The Emperor's voice thundered, not through minds, but through the very soul of the cosmos. I understand now. Your universe created different heroes than mine. Heroes who build instead of destroy, who protect instead of conquer. Let me help you. Power flowed from the Golden Throne into the device, not stolen, but given. The Emperor's choice, his sacrifice, added to the Avengers. The light intensified, the dead zone expanded, and the war began to change. In the Imperium, the Chaos Gods experienced something that would be called panic if they were capable of such mortal emotions. Tzeentch's crystalline labyrinth, a structure of infinite possibility, began to crack. Entire wings of his library, containing every lie ever told, simply vanished. Not destroyed, but ceased to exist from his perspective. For the first time in 60 million years, the changer of ways could not see what came next. The threads of fate were cut. Nurgle's garden, a testament to eternal decay, withered at the edges. The endless cycle of rot and growth slowed to a crawl, becoming mere stillness. Entropy without meaning. Death without life. His plague-bearers cried out in a confusion that bordered on existential terror as their very existence became optional. Khorne's throne of skulls trembled violently. The rivers of blood that fed his power, drawn from 1,000,000 battlefields, began to slow. Their sources in mortal realms no longer connected to his domain. The blood god raged, but his rage had no target, no outlet, no purpose. It was anger in a vacuum, impotent and hollow. And Slaanesh, youngest and hungriest of the four, screamed. It was a silent scream, a frequency of pure absence that killed mortal psychers across 100 star systems. The Prince of Pleasure feeds on sensation, and the dead zone was a realm without sensation. A perfect void where not even suffering could reach. It was anathema. This cannot be permitted. They spoke as one, their voices harmonizing for the first time since their creation. The great game must continue. Without the materium to feed us, we diminish. Without mortal suffering, we starve. We must destroy the source. Their collective attention focused on Tony Stark, the mortal at the center of the expanding dead zone. A single human, sustained by the Emperor's power, but still fundamentally fragile. Kill him, and the device fails. Kill him, and the old order returns. But the dead zone prevented their direct intervention. No demon could manifest within its boundaries. No sorcery could penetrate its walls. The gods were locked out of the very reality they had tormented for millennia. The Primarchs, Tzeentch calculated, his mind racing through the remaining possibilities. They are already in the materium, already anchored by our power. If we channel everything through them, they will burn, Nurgle observed, the thoughts sloughing off him like diseased flesh. The strain will destroy their physical forms. Then they burn, Khorne's thoughtless rage declared. They have served us for 10,000 years. They can die for us now. The decision was made. 4 gods focused their infinite attention on their 4 champions, pouring power through connections that were never designed to handle such flow. Magnus the Red ignited. His mortal-derived form became a vessel for Tzeentch's full might, and it began to crack under the strain. Psychic fire leaking from his very soul. Mortarion swelled with Nurgle's absolute corruption, and the flesh that even plagues could not destroy started to dissolve into a tide of filth. Angron channeled Khorne's endless rage, and his demonic hearts began to burst one by one, each explosion fueling his final suicidal charge. And Fulgrim, beautiful Fulgrim, writhed with Slaanesh's ultimate excess as his perfect form began to warp beyond even demonic stability, becoming a living scream of sensation. They became living weapons, aimed at a single target, the laboratory where Tony Stark maintained the device. But between them and their target stood the Avengers. And behind the Avengers, the Emperor of Mankind gathered his remaining strength. "You cannot have this universe," he declared, his voice reaching even into the warp. "Not anymore. "We will see," the gods responded. "We will see." For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind had been bound to the Golden Throne. His body had been a prison, his consciousness scattered across time and space, his power devoted entirely to keeping the Astronomican lit and the warp at bay. Now, for the first time since Horus stood before him in the final moments of the heresy, he chose to act. The psychic shockwave radiated outward from Holy Terra. It was not an attack, but a declaration. Across 1,000,000 worlds, the faithful fell to their knees, feeling their God's attention upon them, not as a distant star, but as a burning sun. Demons throughout the galaxy screamed as a pure golden light touched them, not the light of stars, but the light of a soul that had burned for 40,000 years without ever being extinguished. "I have watched," the Emperor spoke, his voice reaching every human mind that could receive it. "I have waited. I have endured. Because endurance was all I could offer. But these strangers, these Avengers, have shown me something I had forgotten. Hope is not a liability. Hope is a weapon." On the battlefield, the demon Primarchs paused in their supercharged advance. Something was happening, something that violated 10 millennia of established reality. The Emperor was standing up. It was not physical, not exactly. His corpse body remained on the throne, a withered husk sustained by machinery and sacrifice. But his presence, his psychic avatar, manifested in the material realm for the first time since his interment. He appeared as he was before the heresy, a golden giant, clad in armor that blazed with righteous fury, wielding a flaming sword that could unmake stars. This was the Emperor, as he was meant to be, not a dying god, but a living legend. "Father," Guilliman breathed, seeing his creator whole for the first time in his existence. "Robuta." The Emperor turned toward his son, his voice a torrent of power and affection. "You have carried my burden with honor, but this battle is mine to fight. Let me stand with you. You already do. All of you do." The Emperor's attention encompassed the Avengers, still fighting, still holding the line against impossible odds. They came from beyond our reality to remind me what I once believed: that humanity is worth fighting for. Not because we are strong, but because we can become more than we are. The demon Primarchs, overflowing with their god's desperate power, resumed their charge. Magnus screamed sorcery that could rewrite reality. Mortarion exhaled plague that could end worlds. Angron swung axes that had drunk the blood of empires. Fulgrim struck with a grace that made death into an art form. And the Emperor met them all. His sword deflected Magnus's spell, turning the impossible fire back against its caster. His presence burned away Mortarion's plague, the corruption dissolving in the face of absolute conviction. He caught Angron's axes on his blade, matching the demon Primarch's strength with power that flowed from something beyond mere muscle. And when Fulgrim struck, the Emperor simply looked at his fallen son, and for one instant the Phoenician remembered what he used to be. "You were my children," the Emperor said, sadness mixing with his fury. "I made you to lead humanity to the stars. Instead, you became everything I tried to protect them from. But even now, even after everything, I do not hate you. I mourn you, and I will end your suffering." The battle between the Emperor and his corrupted sons began, the most significant confrontation in 10,000 years. And for the first time, the Chaos Gods faced something they had not experienced since the war in heaven: the genuine possibility of defeat. While gods and demigods clashed in dimensions beyond mortal sight, Steve Rogers fought a different kind of battle on the cold, broken stone of Terra. The war had not paused. The Chaos forces, leaderless but not without purpose, still swarmed the Imperial defenses. Thousands of traitor Marines, their armor a blasphemous mockery of loyalist chapters, pressed the attack, supported by hulking demon engines and corrupted titans that strode through the firestorm like malevolent idols. Steve stood at the primary breach in Terra's outer wall, a jagged wound in the defenses that the enemy had identified as their main infiltration point. Behind him, a desperate, disorganized stream of evacuating civilians fled toward the relative safety of the inner districts. Before him, an army of monsters advanced. "Captain," a custodian said, his golden armor scarred and dented as he fell into position beside him. "This position is untenable. We should withdraw to the secondary line. The palace must be protected." "We hold here," Steve interrupted, his voice calm but absolute. "Those people need time to reach safety." The custodian's helm turned toward him, the impassive faceplate hiding a flicker of confusion. "They are expendable. The many must be protected at the cost of the few. This is the logic of our war." "No one is expendable." The custodian was silent. 3,000 years of indoctrination, of brutal, necessary calculus, screamed that Steve Rogers was wrong. Sacrifice was the foundation of the Imperium. Yet, something in the captain's voice, in the unyielding set of his shoulders, gave the Golden Warrior pause. It was a conviction that felt older and more solid than the fortress walls around them. "How do you propose to hold?" he asked finally, his guardian spear held at the ready. "By not giving up." Steve raised his shield, the star insignia a defiant splash of color against the grim-dark backdrop. "That's worked before." The first wave of traitor Marines crashed against their position. Steve's shield became a blur of motion, deflecting bolter rounds that could punch through tank armor, countering the snarling teeth of chainswords, creating openings for the custodian's spear to exploit with lethal grace. They fought as a single unit, two warriors from utterly different worlds, united by the simple, profound principle of protecting those who could not protect themselves. "You fight well," the custodian admitted, driving his spear through a World Eater's helm with practiced efficiency. "For a baseline human." "You fight well for someone who thinks people are expendable," Steve shot back, slamming his shield into another charging traitor and sending him staggering into the custodian's path. "Perhaps I am reconsidering that position." More enemies came, an endless tide of hatred and corruption. Steve's muscles burned with an exhaustion that went bone deep. The super soldier serum had its limits, and he had been pushing past them for hours. But every time he thought about falling back, he saw the faces of the civilians behind him. Families clutching their children, old men and women who could barely walk. The weak, the vulnerable, the ones the Imperium had taught to expect nothing but suffering. "Clint," he spoke into his comm, his breath ragged. "I need suppressing fire on the eastern approach. They're trying to flank us." "On it, Cap." Arrows rained from above, each one finding a target with impossible precision. Clint had found a perch somewhere in the shattered spires. "How long do we need to hold?" "Until the civilians are clear." "That's not an answer, Steve." "It's the only answer that matters." The battle raged. Steve took wounds. A bolter round grazed his shoulder, searing flesh and armor alike. A chain axe scored a deep gash across his side. But he did not fall. He could not fall. And then, impossibly, the Chaos advance began to falter. Word was spreading through the enemy ranks like a virus of fear. The demon Primarchs were falling. The Chaos Gods were being driven back. The Emperor himself had risen from his throne. For 10,000 years, the forces of chaos had believed their victory was inevitable. Now, for the first time, they faced the terrifying possibility that they might be wrong. Some of them broke and ran. Others fought with the mindless fury of the cornered and desperate. But the tide had turned. "We're holding," the custodian said, something like wonder in his augmented voice. "The evacuations are almost complete, and we're holding." Steve allowed himself a moment, just a single, fleeting moment, to smile through the pain. "Told you," he gasped. "Never give up." The Emperor's battle against his corrupted sons reached its devastating climax. The psychic energies of 4 gods, channeled into 4 demigods, warred against the singular focused will of the master of mankind, and the fabric of reality itself groaned under the strain. Magnus the Red collapsed first. The raw power of Tzeentch had burned through his physical form, and the demon Primarch's essence strained against 2 opposing forces. The dead zone weakening his connection to the warp, and the Emperor's purifying presence scouring what remained. His single cyclopean eye dimmed, the fire of forbidden knowledge replaced by a flicker of ancient sorrow. For a fleeting moment, the scholar that Magnus once was surfaced from the ruin. "Father," he gasped, his voice a psychic whisper across dimensions, "I only wanted to know." The Emperor's golden avatar paused, his flaming sword held aloft. The fury in his aspect softened, replaced by a sorrow that was 10,000 years deep. "I know, my son. You sought knowledge to save your brothers. Your intentions were noble. Your methods were catastrophic. Can you forgive?" "I already have." "Now rest." Magnus the Red did not dissolve into demonic ichor or corrupted ash. Instead, his form unraveled into light. Pure, clean light that ascended toward something beyond mortal perception. In his final moment, the Emperor gave his broken son the one thing he had always craved: understanding. Angron was next. The World Eater fought to the last, his boundless rage finally consuming itself as Khorne's connection frayed and snapped. Without the constant, screaming torrent of power from the Blood God, the demon Primarch's form lost cohesion. The butcher's nails, the engine of his agony for millennia, finally went silent in his skull. "No more pain," Angron whispered, and in the silence of his own mind, there was something that sounded like gratitude. "No more pain," the Emperor confirmed, his voice a balm on a wound that had never been allowed to heal. "Be at peace, Angron. Your war is over." The demon Primarch's death was almost gentle. A warrior, finally, blessedly, allowed to stop fighting. Mortarion resisted longer. Nurgle's gifts included an endurance beyond measure, and the Death Lord had spent 10 millennia learning to suffer. But even he could not withstand the combined assault of the Emperor's wrath and the Dead Zone's absolute nullification. "You think this changes anything?" Mortarion demanded, his bloated form crumbling like leprous flesh. "Even if I fall, chaos endures. The warp is eternal." "Eternal things can still change," the Emperor responded, his voice echoing with the certainty of a new truth. "These Avengers have proven that. Nothing is truly permanent, not even despair." Mortarion's end was slow and agonizing, as befitted a champion of the Plague God. But it was an end. Only Fulgrim remained. The Phoenician had stopped fighting. Since the Emperor's gaze had touched him, since the Dead Zone had silenced the endless, cloying whispers of Slaanesh, Fulgrim had been remembering who he was before the fall. An artist, a philosopher, a primarch who believed in perfection as a path to elevation, not a slide into corruption. "I killed my brother," Fulgrim said quietly, his voice his own for the first time in an age. "Varus, I looked into his eyes and I murdered him. You were not yourself." "Does that excuse anything?" Fulgrim's serpentine form shuddered, a paroxysm of revulsion. "I have done terrible things, Father, things that cannot be undone." "No, they cannot." The Emperor's voice carried an infinite paternal sadness. "But redemption is not about undoing. It is about becoming better than you were, about choosing a new path." "Is there a path for me? After everything?" "There is always a path, even from the deepest darkness." Fulgrim closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were clear, free of Slanesh's influence. "Then let me walk it." He did not dissolve. His form began to change, to purify. The process was agonizing, 10 millennia of corruption being burned away by will and fire. But Fulgrim endured it, because for the first time since his fall, he believed he might deserve to. In the Imperium, the Chaos Gods experienced something unprecedented: strategic withdrawal. Tzeentch was the first to recognize the necessity. The Changer of Ways had always been the most calculating of the four, and his calculations now showed only defeat. The dead zone continued to expand, pushed by Tony Stark's device and amplified by the Emperor's sacrifice. Every moment they resisted, more of their domain was erased. The crystal labyrinth cracked and shattered, entire libraries of fate turning to null space. "This battle is lost," Tzeentch announced, his voice a chorus of fractured futures. "We must retreat, regroup, plan for future engagement." Khorne's response was predictable, a psychic roar of absolute rage that shook the foundations of his own fortress. "Retreat is cowardice. We fight until nothing remains. If we fight until nothing remains, nothing is what remains," Tzeentch countered, his logic a cold shard in the fire of Khorne's fury. "Even your bloodthirst requires blood to exist." The argument raged, gods debating strategy while their very reality crumbled around them. But eventually, even Khorne, the embodiment of thoughtless violence, recognized the mathematics of starvation. Without mortal realms to corrupt, without souls to claim, the Chaos Gods were nothing but thoughts with no thinkers. "This is not over," Nurgle wheezed, pulling his power back from the Materium. His garden, once eternally fecund, now had vast patches of sterile dust where nothing grew and nothing rotted. Entropy is eternal. Eventually, everything rots. But not today, Tzeentch agreed. Today we preserve what we have. We wait. We scheme. Slanesh said nothing. The Prince of Pleasure was wounded more deeply than the others. The dead zone's nullification of sensation, an absolute anathema to everything Slanesh represented. The youngest god withdrew in a profound, agonized silence, already contemplating a revenge that would be exquisite in its cruelty. In the Materium, the effects were immediate and dramatic. The remaining chaos forces, those not already destroyed by the defenders, suddenly lost their supernatural support. Demons that had manifested, flickered, and dissolved back into the raw, churning stuff of the warp. A World Eater watched in horror as the mutations on his arm receded, leaving behind pale, uncorrupted flesh. A demon engine's screaming face went silent, its baleful energies guttering out like a candle in a hurricane. Aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler watched his fleet's status icons flash from green to red, across the hololithic display. "The gods have abandoned us," he said, and there was something almost like relief in his voice. "War Master, your orders?" a lieutenant demanded, his voice tight with panic. Abaddon considered. He could press the attack. His mortal forces were still formidable, and the Imperium was exhausted. But the woman's words echoed in his mind. Something is going to change the rules of this war permanently. She was right. "Order the retreat," Abaddon said, his voice cold and final. "All forces, withdraw to Rally Point Sigma. We regroup beyond the Dead Zone's edge." "But, War Master, the Black Crusade is not over, Lieutenant. It has merely evolved." Abaddon's gaze was fixed on the expanding sphere of calm reality centered on Terra. "The gods will return to us, or they won't. Either way, we fight. That is what we do." The Chaos Fleet began to withdraw. It was not a rout, but an organized tactical retreat. It was not a victory for the Imperium, but something that had not happened in 10,000 years. A break in the eternal war. On Holy Terra, the defenders watched the enemy turn and flee with expressions of shock and disbelief. A custodian lowered his guardian spear, his helmet's sensors struggling to process the sudden absence of warp energy. A line of guardsmen, prepared to die, simply stood and stared at the empty sky. "Is it over?" someone asked into the Vox, their voice trembling. "No," Gilliman responded, his own voice broadcast across the command network. He looked at the expanding dead zone that now encompassed most of the Sol system. "It's not over. It's beginning." He turned his gaze toward the distant spire of the laboratory, where Tony Stark still maintained the device. The man's life force nearly depleted. A flickering candle against the new dawn he had created. "We need to help him," Gilliman declared, his words a command to the entire Imperium. "He has given everything for this. We cannot let him die." Tony Stark was dying. He could feel it in the way his thoughts frayed at the edges, the way his own heartbeat felt distant and unimportant. The device, his beautiful, impossible creation, was drinking his life. The crystalline sphere at its heart pulsed with a light that was no longer just energy. It was memory. It was will. It was the very essence of who he was. "Boss," Friday's voice was a ghost in his ear, stripped of its usual confidence, reduced to a whisper of pure data. "Vital signs are critical. Cardiac function at 12%. Recommend immediate termination of power flow." "Can't," Tony breathed, the word a painful rasp. His vision was a tunnel of blinding white light. "If I stop now, the zone collapses. It all goes back to square one. There are other power sources available. The Emperor is holding himself together with faith and sheer stubbornness," Tony interrupted, the effort costing him. "If he pours more into this, he dies. Permanently. The Astronomican goes dark. The Imperium shatters. We don't trade one apocalypse for another." He tried to think of Pepper, to form a last message, but the light was taking that too, pulling the words from his mind before they could be spoken. Tell her I." Then hands. Solid. Real. Grounding. They clamped onto his shoulders through the armor, and the crushing loneliness of his sacrifice was broken. Steve Rogers was on his right, Carol Danvers on his left. Behind them, he could feel the presence of the others. Thor, radiating ancient power. Natasha and Clint, their focus a tangible force, and a shadow of impossible size that was once Bruce Banner. "You're not doing this alone, Tony," Steve said, his voice as firm and unyielding as his shield. "Cap, I have to—" "No," Steve's hand tightened. A silent command. We have to. We came here together. We fight together. And if someone has to sacrifice themselves, we do that together too. He's right, Carol added, her own cosmic fire beginning to bleed from her hands, not as an attack, but as an offering. I've got stellar energy to spare. Let me carry some of this weight. Thor raised Mjolnir, and lightning, clean and pure, arced from the hammer not to destroy, but to connect, weaving into the device's matrix. I am a god. My essence was forged for moments such as this. Natasha and Clint placed their hands on the back of Steve and Carol, adding their own contribution, not of energy, but of unbreakable will, a disciplined focus that was as potent as any superpower. And the Hulk, still colossal, still radiating the anti-warp interference, placed a surprisingly gentle hand on Tony's pauldron. Friends don't let friends die alone, the voice rumbled. Not through the air, but through the very structure of the armor. The energy flow shifted. The unbearable weight that was crushing Tony's soul was suddenly distributed, shared among six. It still hurt, a pain that went deeper than flesh. But now it was bearable. The final push began. They poured their combined essence into the device, a symphony of sacrifice. The dead zone, which had encompassed the soul system, exploded outward, establishing a permanent, unassailable presence in the galaxy. The light reached a crescendo that silenced all thought. And then it stabilized. The light receded, contracting into the crystalline sphere, which now hummed with a steady, self-sustaining power. The connection broke. Tony felt his own depleted life force return, a trickle at first, then a slow, steady stream. He was alive. They all were. Boss? Friday's voice was stronger now, laced with something like digital wonder. Energy flow has equalized. The device is self-sustaining. You can stop. Tony slumped forward, caught by Steve and Carol. His body was a universe of aches, but he was breathing. They were all still here. Diminished, exhausted, probably stranded in this universe forever, but alive. Did it work? He managed to ask. It worked. Carol's voice was thick with awe and relief. Tony, you beautiful, magnificent idiot. It worked. Language, Steve murmured, and somehow, impossibly, they all found the strength to laugh. The dead zone stabilized at approximately 1/3 of the galaxy. It was not a wall, but a change in the fundamental nature of reality itself. Within its boundaries, the chaotic roar of the warp was reduced to a distant, impotent whisper. Psychers across 1,000,000 worlds felt their powers diminish, but also become clean, free from the constant, corrupting touch of the ruinous powers. Demons could no longer claw their way into existence. Interstellar travel, once reliant on the Emperor's light, became more dangerous as the Astronomican's guidance failed within the zone. Yet, it also became profoundly safer, for the horrors it had once held at bay simply ceased to exist there. The Imperium, a civilization built for eternal siege, now faced a choice it had not known in 10,000 years: adapt or collapse. Robute Gilliman took charge of the transition. In the strategic chambers beneath the palace, he stood before a hololith displaying the new, fractured map of human space. The plans he had harbored for 2 centuries, reforms once deemed too radical, too dangerous, too hopeful, were now possible. We will need to develop new methods of navigation, he announced to his advisors. The Astronomican served the old paradigm. This new reality requires something different. Archmagos Belisarius Call, his mechanical form whirring with processing activity, responded, The technology provided by the outsiders, it has offered considerable inspiration. The Mechanicus is already formulating alternatives. Gilliman's gaze fell upon the flickering border of the dead zone. And the outer territories, those who remain beyond its edge? An admiral answered, "They face a choice, Lord Commander. Join us within the zone, or remain in the old galaxy, with its old dangers." Gilliman nodded slowly. "Give them time. Make it clear that these new borders are not walls. They are invitations." Across the nascent Sanctum Imperium, the changes began. The ecclesiarchy struggled, its faith in a dying god now forced to reconcile with a living one who had actively saved his people. The Inquisition faced a terrifying future where its most brutal methods might no longer be necessary, where the enemy was not a constant, corrupting presence. And among the common people, the trillions who had known nothing but suffering, a new and alien concept began to take root: hope. The Avengers watched these changes from a high observation deck in the Imperial Palace, their bodies still mending from a sacrifice that had nearly unmade them. "We did this," Steve Rogers said, his voice quiet with the weight of their actions. "We changed everything." Natasha Romanoff stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "For better or for worse," she added. Thor, his divine energy slowly returning, shook his head. "For better," he said, his voice firm. This universe's dark fate was not inevitable. It was a choice, made again and again by beings who believed despair was the only option. We showed them another way. Clint Barton stretched muscles that ached in ways he had never known. "Great," he said, a weary grin touching his lips. "So we're stuck in a dimension of eternal grimdark with no way home. But at least we made things slightly less horrible. I call that a win." Tony Stark, leaning heavily against the armored glass, gave a weak laugh. "About that no way home thing." The others turned, their attention sharpening. "I've been analyzing the armor's systems. That crystalline matrix, the solidified possibility that powered the device. It has enough residual power for one more transition. The same technology that brought us here might be reversible." Carol Danvers's eyes widened. "We can go back?" "Maybe," Tony corrected. "Probably. It'll be complex. We'd need to coordinate with the Emperor to create a stable exit point, but yeah, we might be able to go home." Silence fell over the group. The possibility of return, something they had dismissed as impossible, was suddenly real. "What about them?" Steve asked, gesturing to the recovering Imperium beyond the window. "They still have enemies. They still need our help." Tony met his gaze. "They have Gilliman," he said. "They have the dead zone, and most importantly, they have something they didn't have before we arrived. They have hope. Whatever we've given them, I think it'll be enough." Steve considered this, looking from Tony to the sprawling city below, a city that was, for the first time in memory, not preparing for the next inevitable disaster. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Let's go home." The Emperor's avatar appeared in the laboratory where Tony Stark and the others were preparing for their departure. He did not arrive in a blaze of psychic fire, but materialized like heat haze, his form shimmering, less the golden god of war, and more the ancient, weary man who had once dreamed of leading humanity to the stars. "You are leaving." The voice was not a psychic thunderclap, but a thought that settled gently into their minds. "We have people back home who need us," Steve explained, his voice steady. "Family, friends, our own universe to protect." "I understand." "Better than you know." The Emperor's form solidified, his expression one of profound, ancient melancholy. I had people I cared about once. Before the long war, before the throne, I remember what it means to love something more than duty. What will you do now? Tony asked, his armor's systems humming quietly as they stabilized the portal's coordinates. Now that the immediate threat is contained? Heal, grow stronger, and perhaps walk among my people again, rather than above them. Something that might have been a smile touched the Emperor's features. You have reminded me what I once believed, that humanity is capable of greatness, if given the chance. I forgot that truth for 10,000 years. I will not forget it again. Gilliman entered, his massive form filling the doorway. He was accompanied by a small delegation of Imperial representatives, their faces a mixture of awe and gratitude. The portal is ready, the Primarch reported. His gaze lingered on the Avengers, his expression complex. Though I confess, I will miss your company. You made me believe in possibilities I had long since abandoned. Keep believing in them, Steve said, stepping forward and extending his hand. That's how they become real. Gilliman looked at the offered hand, then took it. The handshake was a gesture of impossible equality. A baseline human from another reality and a demigod Primarch, meeting as peers. I will, Gilliman promised, and if you ever find a way back, there will be a place for you here. Not as warriors, but as friends. The other farewells were spoken in actions. Thor clasped arms with the Custodian commanders who had fought beside him, a silent exchange of warriors' respect. Natasha shared a data slate with a high-ranking intelligence officer, a final exchange of information between spies. Clint demonstrated a flaw in a standard-issue lasguns sighting mechanism to a group of young soldiers, earning him looks of shocked appreciation. Carol, meanwhile, was deep in a technical discussion with a navigator, sharing insights on faster-than-light travel that did not rely on the warp. Bruce, his form slowly shrinking back toward human but still tinged with green, spoke with the tech priests who had monitored his transformation. The interference effect, one of them said, his augmented voice vibrating with awe. A living null field, yet selective. It blocked the warp while permitting other energies. If we could replicate it, you'd need someone willing to be very, very angry for a very long time, Bruce said wryly. I don't recommend it. And yet you did it. I had good reasons. Bruce looked over at his teammates, gathering near the humming distortion in reality. Sometimes the best way to fight monsters is to become one. But you need friends to bring you back when it's over. The portal stabilized, blossoming from a tear into a shimmering window. Through the swirling energies they could see something achingly familiar, the blue and white marble of Earth. Their Earth. Home. Thank you, the Emperor said, his voice a final, resonant chord that touched them all. For everything. Tony Stark, his faceplate retracted, turned back one last time. Just returning the favor, he replied. Someone once told me that the only sure defeat is the one you accept before the fight begins. I'm starting to think that wisdom might be universal. One by one, the Avengers stepped through the portal. Steve was last, giving a final respectful nod to Gilliman and the Emperor before disappearing into the light. The window to another universe wavered, shrank, and sealed itself with a sound like a sigh, leaving the Imperium of man, battered, changed, but finally hopeful, to begin its long recovery. As the last shimmering energies of the portal faded, the Avengers found themselves standing in the familiar quiet of their own world. The air tasted different here, cleaner, lighter, free of the psychic weight that had pressed down on them for what felt like an eternity. Back in the 41st millennium, the long work of rebuilding began. It would take centuries. The old habits of fear and dogma would die hard. But as Gilliman issued his first decrees for a new era, a strange and unfamiliar feeling began to spread through the collective consciousness of humanity. Hope. The chaos gods watched from the darkness beyond the dead zone's edge, patient as only eternal things can be. They would return. But when they did, they would face an Imperium that remembered how to believe in victory. And in a universe far, far away, in a tower overlooking a city that knew nothing of corpse starch or psychic screams, the Avengers shared a quiet drink. The silence was comfortable, the air clean, the future bright. "So," Clint said, breaking the quiet as he stared out the window, "what do we tell Fury? Sorry we were off the grid for a week. We were busy arguing theology with a 10,000-year-old psychic emperor." "We tell him we were on a team-building retreat," Natasha suggested, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Very exclusive. No cell service." "I'm just glad to be home," Steve said, his voice filled with a quiet contentment that had been absent for what felt like a lifetime. "Amen to that," Tony agreed, raising his glass. Outside, the Earth spun on, beautiful and fragile. They had traveled across universes, faced gods and demons, and discovered something worth more than any victory. They had found their way home.